I should have known something was wrong when the static cleared. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've been driving these highways for 12 years. 12 years of listening to the constant hum of CB chatter, dispatch calls, and the white noise that fills the spaces between truck stops. You learn to hear the difference between legitimate traffic and the ghost signals that bounce around the mountains. But that night in January, heading through Laramie in the worst blizzard I'd seen in a decade, the voice that came through Channel 19 sounded more real than my own thought. I'd been running behind schedule all day. Started in Denver with a load of automotive parts bound for Billings, but the weather had other plans. By the time I reached the Pilot Travel Center in Laramie, visibility was maybe 20 feet, and the Wyoming Department of Transportation was talking about closing Interstate 80 entirely. I'd pulled in to fuel up and grab coffee, hoping the storm would ease enough to push through. The parking lot was maybe half full, which told me other drivers were making the same calculation: wait it out, or risk getting stranded on the highway. The fuel island was slick with ice, and my breath hung in the air like smoke as I topped off the tank. Inside, the travel center hummed with the usual late-night energy drivers, hunched over coffee, studying weather apps and route planners on their phones. The clerk behind the counter, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, kept glancing nervously at the windows as snow piled against the glass. I grabbed my usual black coffee and a sandwich I wouldn't taste and checked in with dispatch. Nothing unusual. No updates on road conditions beyond what I already knew. The automated system confirmed my delivery window in Billings, still expecting me by noon tomorrow despite the weather. I'd been with the company long enough to know they'd rather have you try and fail than not try at all. Back in the cab, I settled in to wait. The CB crackled with intermittent traffic drivers sharing road reports, complaining about dispatch, the usual mix of professionalism and boredom that fills the airwaves. I was half listening, my attention split between the weather radar on my phone and the hypnotic pattern of snow swirling in the parking lot lights. That's when I heard my call sign. Blue Mountain Transport Unit 747. This is dispatch with route revision. I grabbed the mic immediately. It was past midnight, unusual for a dispatch call, but not unheard of during severe weather events. Sometimes they rerouted entire fleets to avoid closed highways or dangerous conditions. Dispatch, this is 747. Go ahead. 747. Due to interstate closure projections, we're implementing alternate routing. You'll need to exit the travel center and proceed north on Highway 287 toward Medicine Bow. Additional instructions to follow. I frowned. Highway 287 would take me deeper into the mountains, not around the storm. Dispatch, can you confirm that routing? 287 looks like it's heading directly into the weather system. Confirmed. 747. This routing is based on current DOT communications and weather service projections. Interstate closure is imminent. Proceed north immediately for optimal travel window. The voice was clear, professional, using the right terminology, but something felt off. The cadence was slightly wrong, like someone reading from a script they'd memorized but didn't quite understand. Still, I'd followed stranger instructions from dispatch before. They had access to information I didn't, real-time updates from highway departments and weather services. I fired up the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, the CB still crackling with the storm static that always accompanied heavy weather. As I merged onto Highway 287, heading north into the mountains, the voice came back. 747. Excellent. Continue north for approximately 40 miles. Then watch for secondary routing instructions. Copy. Dispatch. 40 miles north on 287. The highway was worse than I'd expected. Snow had drifted across both lanes in places, and I could feel the truck working harder as the elevation increased. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the falling snow, revealing brief glimpses of pine trees and guardrails before they disappeared back into the white void. After about 20 minutes, I realized I hadn't seen another vehicle, not even tracks in the snow ahead of me. For a major trucking route during a storm, that was unusual. There should have been at least some traffic. Other drivers making the same calculated risk. Dispatch, this is 747. Road conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Haven't seen any other traffic. Can you confirm this is an active trucking corridor? 747. Conditions are being monitored. Continue as instructed. Other units are reporting successful passage through your current area. Other units. But the CB had been quiet except for distant chatter that faded in and out with the storm. I should have been hearing other drivers on this route, especially if dispatch was directing multiple trucks through the same corridor. The unease started as a small knot in my stomach. I'd been driving long enough to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. But the voice on the radio was calm, authoritative, using my correct call sign and company protocols. It had to be legitimate. At the 30-mile mark, the voice returned. 747. Prepare for eastbound turn onto Forest Service Road 412 in approximately 2 miles. This will connect you to Highway 130 for continued northbound travel. Forest Service Road. In a blizzard. At night. In a 70-foot truck carrying 20 tons of automotive parts. Dispatch. 747. Need to confirm this routing. Forest Service Road 412 doesn't appear on my commercial navigation as truck-friendly. Confirmed routing. 747. Road conditions have been verified for commercial vehicle passage. This is your optimal path to avoid interstate closure. I wanted to refuse. Every rational part of my mind was screaming that this was wrong. But 12 years of following dispatch instructions, of trusting the voice on the radio, overrode my hesitation. The company didn't pay drivers to make routing decisions. They paid us to drive where we were told. I found the turnoff exactly where the voice had indicated. A narrow paved road that disappeared into the trees, marked with a small green sign that was barely visible through the snow. I downshifted and made the turn, feeling the trailer slide slightly as we left the highway. The Forest Service Road was a nightmare, barely wide enough for the truck, with steep drop-offs on one side and rock walls on the other. Snow had drifted deep across the pavement, and I could feel the drive wheels spinning as we climbed steadily into the mountains. My GPS showed nothing but blank space. We were in an area with no cell coverage, no detailed mapping. Dispatch. 747. This road is not suitable for commercial vehicles. Need immediate routing revision. Static. Nothing but static. Dispatch. This is 747 requesting immediate assistance. More static, and then something that made my blood freeze. The voice came back, but it was different now. The professional tone was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost amused. 747, you're exactly where you need to be. I slammed on the brakes, the truck shuddering to a stop in the middle of the narrow road. The silence that followed was absolute. No engine noise from other vehicles, no CB chatter, just the whisper of snow against the windshield and my own ragged breathing. I grabbed the mic with shaking hands. Who is this? This isn't dispatch. The voice that answered was no longer pretending to be professional. No, Marcus. This isn't dispatch. Dispatch closed hours ago. But you followed me anyway, didn't you? Just like all the others. The others. I tried to reverse, but the road was too narrow, and I could feel the trailer starting to jackknife. I was trapped on a mountain road that my GPS insisted didn't exist, talking to someone who knew my name, but wasn't who they claimed to be. Who are you? I whispered into the mic. I'm the voice that calls to drivers in the storm. The voice that offers a way through when there is no way. I've been calling from this mountain for longer than you've been alive, Marcus. And drivers like you always answer. I looked at the CB radio with new horror. The signal strength indicator showed I was receiving a powerful, clear transmission. But out here, miles from any communication tower, in terrain that should have blocked most radio signals, that was impossible. The voice continued, almost gentle now. You can try to turn around, Marcus. You can try to go back, but the road behind you is already gone. It only exists when you're following my voice. I looked in my mirrors and saw nothing but white. Not just snow empty white, as if the road we'd traveled simply ended a few feet behind the trailer. What do you want? I managed to ask. Nothing you weren't already giving me. Your trust. Your willingness to follow the voice in the static. I've been so lonely up here, Marcus. But now you'll stay with me, won't you? Just like David did last winter, and Sarah the year before that. The names hit me like physical blows. I remembered the missing driver reports, the trucks found abandoned on remote roads, the drivers who simply vanished during winter storms. Always described the same way. Experienced drivers, careful drivers, drivers who would never take unnecessary risks. I spent the rest of that night in the cab, engine running, heater on, listening to the voice in the static tell me about all the drivers who had followed its instructions over the years. It knew everything about them, their routes, their families, their last conversations with real dispatch. It spoke about them like old friends, like companions who had chosen to stay. When dawn finally came, I was parked in the lot of the Pilot Travel Center in Laramie. My truck was exactly where I'd left it the night before. Snow piled around the tires. The fuel gauge showed I hadn't moved. The odometer showed I hadn't moved. But my CB radio was tuned to a frequency that didn't exist on any channel chart. And when I turned it off, I could still hear the voice whispering from the static. I delivered my load to Billings 2 days late. Told dispatch I'd waited out the storm like dozens of other drivers. But I never forgot the voice that knew my name. The road that existed only when I was following its instructions, or the gentle way it spoke about drivers who would never make it home. I still hear it sometimes, late at night when the static is thick and the highway stretches empty ahead of me. It calls my name from channels that shouldn't exist, offering shortcuts through storms that would kill me, promising routes that lead nowhere anyone should go. I've learned not to answer, but every time I hear that voice in the static, I remember the way it said, just like all the others. And I wonder, how many drivers are still out there, following instructions from a dispatcher that was never real, traveling roads that exist only in the space between static and silence. The worst part is knowing that someday, when the storm is bad enough, and I'm tired enough, and desperate enough, I might answer again. Because that voice sounds so reasonable, so professional, so much like help when you need it most. And once you've heard it call your name, it never really stops. The receipt was still warm when I found it crumpled in my jacket pocket. My name is Sarah Rodriguez, and I've been an owner-operator for 7 years now. 7 years of keeping meticulous records, tracking every gallon of fuel and every mile driven. Because in this business, precision keeps you profitable, and careless bookkeeping can bankrupt you overnight. I've never been the type to lose track of where I've been or what I've spent. That's why finding a fuel receipt for 63 gallons from the TA Travel Center in Effingham, Illinois, made absolutely no sense. I was parked at a rest stop outside Springfield, Missouri, running through my daily paperwork before the mandatory 10-hour break. The receipt showed a purchase timestamp from earlier that morning, 7:42 a.m., pump number 6, diesel at $3.18 per gallon. My signature was on the bottom, clear and unmistakable, but I'd never stopped in Effingham. My route had taken me straight through on Interstate 70. No stops except for a quick coffee break at a Casey's in Columbia. I checked my electronic logbook, the one the DOT requires us to maintain digitally. According to the GPS tracking, I'd driven continuously from Kansas City to Springfield, with only the documented stop in Columbia. No deviation toward Effingham, no gap in the timeline that would account for a fuel stop. Yet my fuel gauge showed full tanks, and the receipt in my hand was undeniably real. More troubling was the handwritten note I'd apparently made in my paper logbook. Talked with Jimmy at Pump 6 about the new biodiesel blend. Says it runs cleaner, but watch for filter issues in cold weather. Also mentioned the old accident site near mile marker 163 on I-70. Truck went through the guardrail in '09. Driver didn't make it. The handwriting was mine. I recognized the way I dotted my I's and crossed my T's, but I had no memory of writing it, no recollection of any conversation with someone named Jimmy, and certainly no knowledge of any accident from 2009. I called the TA Travel Center in Effingham from my cell phone, using the number printed on the receipt. A pleasant woman answered on the second ring. TA Travel Center. This is Monica. How can I help you? Hi, this is Sarah Rodriguez. I think I may have stopped at your location this morning around 7:40, Pump 6. I was wondering if you could tell me who was working the fuel desk then. A pause. Let me check the schedule. This morning at 7:40 would have been, well, that's odd. According to our records, Pump 6 was out of order for maintenance this morning. Has been since yesterday afternoon. My hands started to shake slightly. Out of order? Are you sure? Positive. We've got a repair crew coming tomorrow. Pump 6 hasn't dispensed fuel in over 24 hours. I thanked her and hung up, staring at the receipt that documented a transaction from a pump that couldn't have sold fuel. The rational part of my mind tried to find explanations. Maybe the receipt was old, mixed in with current paperwork. Maybe I'd confused locations, but the timestamp was clear, and the receipt was printed on paper that looked and felt fresh. That evening, I called my dispatcher to report the discrepancy. Company policy required us to document any unusual circumstances, and a fuel purchase I couldn't remember definitely qualified. Sarah, I'm looking at your electronic logs right now, Linda said. No, stop in Effingham. Your GPS track shows continuous movement on I-70. But here's the weird thing. Your fuel efficiency numbers are consistent with a full tank refill somewhere around that time. What does that mean? It means, according to your truck's computer, you definitely bought fuel this morning. The system shows a 63-gallon purchase logged automatically through your fleet card, but there's no GPS record of you stopping anywhere that sells fuel. After Linda hung up, I sat in my sleeper berth, staring at the receipt and my handwritten notes about Jimmy and the accident. On impulse, I searched online for traffic fatalities on Interstate 70 near Effingham in 2009. It took some digging, but I found it. A single vehicle accident at mile marker 161, not 163 like I'd written. A trucker named Raymond Walsh had lost control during a storm, crashed through the guardrail, and died at the scene. Close enough to match my notes, but not exact. And why would I have written about an accident from years before I started driving? The next morning, I decided to drive back to the TA Travel Center in Effingham. I needed to see the place for myself, to understand what had happened. The detour would cost me time and fuel, but the alternative was accepting that I'd lost several hours of memory and somehow acquired knowledge about people and events I'd never encountered. The travel center looked exactly as I'd expected. A standard TA layout with fuel islands, a restaurant, and a trucking supply store. Pump 6 had orange cones around it and an out-of-order sign. I parked and went inside to find Monica, the woman I'd spoken with on the phone. She was behind the customer service counter, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested years of dealing with cranky drivers and difficult customers. "You're Sarah, the one who called about Pump 6 yesterday," she said before I could introduce myself. "I remember your voice." "That's right. I know this sounds strange, but I wanted to ask about someone named Jimmy who might work here. I think I talked with him yesterday morning." Monica's expression changed immediately. The polite customer service mask fell away, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Jimmy? Jimmy Harrison? I don't know his last name. I just have a note that says, I talked with Jimmy about biodiesel blends and some accident that happened in 2009. Monica was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Jimmy Harrison worked here for about 15 years, she finally said. "Started when the place opened in '94. Really knew his way around diesel engines. Always happy to chat with drivers about fuel additives and maintenance tips. Can I talk to him? Is he working today?" "No, Sarah. You can't talk to Jimmy. He died in 2012. Massive heart attack right here at work. Found him collapsed behind pump 6. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the counter to steady myself. That's impossible. I talked to him yesterday morning. I wrote down what he said. Monica looked at me with a mixture of pity and something else I couldn't identify. Honey, a lot of drivers think they remember talking to Jimmy. Happens maybe once or twice a year. They come in with stories about conversations they had with him, usually about that old accident site. Jimmy was obsessed with that crash, always warning drivers about that stretch of highway. You're saying other drivers have had the same experience? Similar enough. They remember talking to someone at pump 6 about truck maintenance or road safety. Sometimes they have receipts from pumps that weren't working. Always seems to happen to drivers who are running alone, pushing hard to make deadlines. She paused. You look tired, Sarah. When's the last time you had a real break? I couldn't answer. I was staring at the receipt in my hand, at my own handwriting, documenting a conversation with a dead man about an accident he'd apparently never stopped thinking about. The thing is, Monica continued quietly, Jimmy always said that stretch of highway was dangerous because drivers get hypnotized by the road. Long, straight sections, not much to see. Easy to zone out and lose track of time. He thought that's what happened to Raymond Walsh. I left the travel center without buying anything, my head spinning with questions I couldn't answer. The drive back to my route was a blur of highway and confusion. Every time I glanced at my fuel gauge, it showed full tanks. Every time I looked at the receipt, it confirmed a transaction that couldn't have happened. But the most disturbing part was the growing certainty that I could remember fragments of the conversation with Jimmy. His voice, gravelly from years of cigarettes. The way he leaned against the fuel pump while talking, his uniform shirt stained with diesel. The concern in his eyes when he warned me about the accident site. Memories of a conversation with a man who'd been dead for over a decade. I still have that receipt. It sits in my logbook like a bookmark, between what I know to be true and what I can't explain. Sometimes, late at night in truck stop parking lots, I take it out and study the timestamp, the pump number, my own signature at the bottom. I've stopped trying to rationalize it. Instead, I've started paying closer attention to other receipts, other conversations, other moments when memory doesn't quite align with reality. Because if Jimmy could reach across the years to warn me about dangerous highway hypnosis, if Pump 6 could dispense fuel for a dead man's wisdom, then maybe the line between what was and what isn't as solid as I'd always believed. The highway can play tricks on your mind when you're tired and alone. But sometimes, I think, those tricks might be trying to keep you safe. The first time I heard my own voice on the CB radio, I thought someone was playing back a recording. My name is David Kowalski, and I've been driving for Patterson Freight for 18 years. 18 years of the same routes, same truck stops, same voices crackling through the static on Channel 19. You get to know the regulars, the drivers who check in at certain mile markers, the dispatchers with their clipped professional tones, the night owls who keep the airwaves alive during the long dark hours between cities. But you never expect to hear yourself talking when you know your mouth is closed. It happened on a Tuesday night in October, pulling into the Love's Travel stop in Salina, Kansas. I'd been running a load of agricultural equipment from Des Moines to Amarillo, making good time despite construction delays through Kansas City. The CB had been quiet most of the evening, unusual for that corridor, but not unheard of. Sometimes the atmospheric conditions just don't cooperate, and voices that normally carry for miles get swallowed by the prairie wind. I was backing into a parking space when I heard it clearly, my own voice, unmistakably mine, reporting my position and destination to someone I couldn't hear responding. This is Patterson Unit 479 eastbound on I-70. Mile marker 252. ETA Amarillo 0600 tomorrow. Running agricultural equipment. Gross weight 78,000 pounds. I grabbed the CB mic and keyed it immediately. Breaker, this is Patterson 479. Someone just broadcast using my call sign and information. Please identify yourself. Static. Nothing but the empty hiss of open channel. I tried again. This is the real Patterson 479. Whoever just used my call sign, that's a federal violation. Identify yourself immediately. A voice I recognized as Tommy Martinez, a driver I'd known for years, came back. Dave, that was you, brother. Just heard you loud and clear giving your position and load info. Tommy, that wasn't me. I didn't key my mic. Man, I'm looking at you right now across the parking lot. Saw you talking into your CB. Same voice, same call sign, same info you always give. I looked across the lot and saw Tommy's distinctive blue Peterbilt. Through his windshield, I could see him holding his CB mic, looking confused. I waved at him, and he waved back. Tommy, I'm waving at you right now. I haven't touched my mic in the last 10 minutes. A long pause. Then, Dave, you need to check your equipment, buddy. Something ain't right. I spent the next hour going through my CB radio system with a fine-tooth comb. Connections were solid, antenna was properly mounted, power supply was clean. Everything checked out normally. But the incident left me with a crawling sensation between my shoulder blades. The feeling you get when you know someone is watching you but can't see them. The next morning, heading south toward Amarillo, it happened again. This time I was certain my radio was off. I'd specifically turned it off after the previous night's weirdness, but Tommy's voice crackled through the speaker anyway. Dave, you're doing it again, man. Just heard you report your position at mile marker 194, southbound on 355. I looked at my CB radio. The power indicator was dark. The unit was definitely off. Tommy, my radio is turned off. Has been since I left Salina. Brother, I can see your antenna moving when you talk. You're definitely transmitting. I pulled over at the next truck stop and called Tommy on his cell phone. When he answered, I could hear CB chatter in the background. Tommy, it's Dave. I'm calling you on my cell phone. My CB radio is turned off and unplugged. Hold on, Dave. I heard him talking to someone else. Then he came back on the line. There's 3 other drivers here who just heard you give a position report on the CB. But if you're calling me on your cell, neither of us finished that thought. Over the next several days, the reports became more frequent and more detailed. Other drivers would radio to tell me they'd heard my voice broadcasting not just my location, but specific information about my cargo, my fuel stops, even my planned rest periods. Information that would be valuable to cargo thieves or anyone looking to target a specific truck. The pattern was always the same. My voice, my call sign, accurate information about my current status and plans, but I would be asleep, or eating, or talking to someone in person anywhere except near my CB radio. I started documenting everything. Times, locations, witnesses. I even bought a digital recorder and left it running in my cab, hoping to catch whatever was happening. But the recordings only captured silence during the times when other drivers reported hearing my transmissions. The breaking point came on a Friday night outside of Denver. I was in a restaurant, having dinner with 3 other drivers, when my CB radio, locked in my truck 50 yards away, allegedly broadcast detailed information about a high-value electronics load I was carrying the following week. A load that wasn't even on my schedule yet, that only my dispatcher and I knew about. Frank Williams, a driver I'd known for over a decade, called me on my cell while I was still at the dinner table. Dave, you need to get back to your truck right now. I just heard you give out information about some electronics run next week. Detailed stuff, pickup location, delivery address, even the value of the cargo. That's the kind of intel that gets drivers robbed. Frank, I'm sitting in a restaurant. I haven't been near my truck in 2 hours. I'm looking at your truck right now, Dave. I can see your CB antenna, and it just stopped moving, like someone just finished talking. I ran out to the parking lot with the other drivers following. My truck was exactly as I'd left it, doors locked, CB radio turned off. But Frank was adamant about what he'd heard. Play it back, I said. If someone's using my voice to broadcast sensitive information, there has to be a recording somewhere. That's when Frank told me something that made my blood freeze. Dave, I tried to record it. Been trying for days now. But every time your voice comes on the radio, my recording equipment stops working. All of ours do. It's like whatever's transmitting doesn't want to be captured. I called my dispatcher from the restaurant parking lot and reported the security breach. She pulled the electronic logs from my truck's computer system, confirming what I already knew. My CB radio hadn't been used. The system showed no transmission activity, but she'd also received calls from company security asking about reports that sensitive load information was being broadcast over unsecured channels. Dave, I need you to bring the truck in for a complete electronics inspection. Something's compromising our communications, and we can't have load details getting out to the wrong people. The inspection took 3 days. They pulled apart every piece of electronic equipment in my truck, tested the CB radio, the GPS system, the satellite communication unit. Everything tested normal. No evidence of tampering, no hidden transmitters, no explanation for how my voice could be broadcast from equipment that wasn't even powered on. But the broadcasts continued. The final incident happened 2 weeks later, at the same Love's Travel stop in Salina, where it had all started. I'd deliberately chosen a different parking spot, far from where I'd been that first night. My CB radio wasn't just turned off. I'd physically disconnected it from the power supply and locked it in my toolbox. I was in the shower when Tommy Martinez found me. Dave, we got a problem. Just heard you on the CB, giving out your personal information. Home address, social security number, bank account details. Whatever's happening, it's getting worse. I stood there in the shower stall, water running cold, understanding with horrible clarity that this wasn't about my CB radio anymore. Something had taken my voice, my identity, and was using it to broadcast information I'd never spoken aloud. Information that existed only in my head. The other drivers were gathered around Tommy's truck when I came out of the shower building. 7 or 8 familiar faces, all looking at me with a mixture of concern and something else, something that looked like fear. Dave, said Billy Patterson, an old-timer I'd known since I started driving. We all heard it. Your voice, clear as day, giving out your mother's maiden name, your first pet's name, your high school girlfriend's phone number, stuff nobody else should know. I tried to speak, to explain that I'd never said any of those things. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. My voice was gone, stolen by whatever had been using it to broadcast my most private information to anyone listening on Channel 19. I never got my voice back. Not completely. It returns sometimes, in whispers and fragments, but it's never quite right, never quite mine. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with my vocal cords, no medical explanation for the loss. But I know better. My voice is still out there, somewhere in the static between radio stations, broadcasting information about drivers who think their conversations are private. Other drivers have started reporting similar incidents, their own voices giving away details they never shared, routes they never discussed, cargo information that should have been secure. The CB radio in my truck stays locked in its toolbox. I don't drive the same routes anymore, don't stop at the same truck stops. But sometimes, late at night when the channels are quiet and the static is thick with atmospheric interference, I tune in to Channel 19 and listen. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear my voice talking to someone I can't hear, sharing information I never knew I had, speaking words I never chose to say. It sounds lonely out there in the static, like it's searching for something it lost, like it's trying to find its way back home. I woke up in a parking lot I'd never seen before, with the taste of diesel fumes and something else, something metallic and wrong, coating my tongue. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I've been running long-haul routes for 16 years. 16 years of knowing exactly where I am at any given moment, of planning every mile, every fuel stop, every mandatory rest period down to the minute. In this business, Losing track of your location isn't just unprofessional, it can be catastrophic. Your cargo, your schedule, your entire livelihood depends on precision. That's why waking up in an unmarked truck stop 400 miles from where I should have been felt like discovering I'd lost pieces of my own life. The last clear memory I had was pulling into the Flying J Travel Plaza in Amarillo, Texas, around 10 p.m. on a Thursday night. I was hauling refrigerated pharmaceuticals from Phoenix to Memphis, running on schedule despite heavy traffic through Albuquerque. Standard stuff, climate-controlled cargo that required constant monitoring, but nothing I hadn't handled 1,000 times before. I remember parking, checking the reefer unit, and settling in for my mandatory 10-hour break. The next thing I knew, I was sitting behind the wheel of my idling truck in what appeared to be a rest area I didn't recognize, watching the sun rise over landscape that looked nothing like the Texas Panhandle. Rolling hills covered in unfamiliar vegetation, road signs in a font I'd never seen, and a sky that seemed somehow too blue, too clean. My GPS showed my location as a set of coordinates that didn't correspond to any place I could identify. According to the device, I was parked on State Route 447, but when I checked my atlas, I still carry paper maps because electronics fail. No such route existed in any state I knew. The electronic logs told an impossible story. According to the mandatory tracking system, I'd driven continuously for 8 hours after leaving Amarillo, covering 396 miles through a series of highways and secondary roads. But the route displayed on my GPS screen included roads designated with numbers that didn't exist. State Route 447, County Road 993, Highway 731. I'd supposedly made fuel stops, rest breaks, and even a way station check, all documented with precise timestamps and locations. But I remembered none of it. I called dispatch immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. Rachel Martinez had been my dispatcher for 8 years. She knew my routes, my habits, my obsessive punctuality. "Jen, where the hell are you?" she said before I could even speak. "Your truck's been showing movement all night, but you haven't responded to any of our check-in calls." "Rachel, I don't know where I am. My GPS shows coordinates that don't make sense, and I can't find my current location on any map." "Hold on," I could hear her typing furiously. "Okay, according to our satellite tracking, you're currently parked at. That's weird. Our system shows you at a truck stop called Waypoint Travel Center, but there's no such facility in our database, and the address doesn't correspond to any real location." I looked around the rest area where I'd awakened. It was clean, well-maintained, with modern fuel pumps and a building that looked like it had been constructed recently. But there were no company logos, no brand identifiers, nothing that would indicate which chain owned the facility. The pumps had numbers, but no brand markings. The building was generic in a way that felt almost deliberately anonymous. "Rachel, I need you to track my route from last night. Something's wrong. I don't remember driving anywhere. I'm pulling up the data now. Jen, this doesn't make sense. Your truck left Amarillo at 11:47 p.m. and followed a route that our mapping system can't verify. You made stops at 3 different locations for fuel and rest breaks, but none of these places show up in our commercial database." The more we talked, the clearer it became that I'd somehow driven hundreds of miles through territory that officially didn't exist, following roads that weren't on any map, stopping at facilities that had no commercial registration, and I remembered none of it. Over the next few hours, Rachel worked with company headquarters to trace my movements. What they found was even more disturbing than the missing memory. Security cameras at the truck stops where I'd allegedly refueled showed footage of me going through the motions of purchasing fuel, checking my load, and completing my mandatory logbook entries. But in every frame, my eyes were closed. "Jen, you need to see this footage," Rachel said when she called me back. "I'm sending it to your phone now, but I have to warn you, it's unsettling." The video files showed me moving through a normal fueling routine, with the mechanical precision of someone following a well-rehearsed script. I watched myself swipe my fuel card, operate the pump, and walk into the store to pay. But my face was completely blank, my eyes closed or staring at nothing, my movements unnaturally fluid and purposeful. In one video, I appeared to be having a conversation with someone just outside the camera's range. I could see myself nodding, responding to questions I couldn't hear, following directions from someone who cast no shadow and left no reflection in the store's windows. Rachel, this isn't sleepwalking. People don't sleepwalk for 8 hours while operating an 18-wheeler. They don't navigate complex fuel stops and maintain detailed logbooks while unconscious. I know. That's what's scaring me. The medical evaluation that followed was inconclusive. Blood tests showed no evidence of drugs or alcohol, no indication of any substance that might cause memory loss or altered consciousness. The sleep study revealed normal patterns. According to every medical professional I consulted, there was no physical reason for the missing hours or the documented trance-like behavior, but the GPS data remained, showing a detailed record of travel through roads that cartographers insisted had never been built. The security footage existed, displaying my unconscious interaction with someone or something that couldn't be recorded. And most disturbing of all, my refrigerated cargo had been maintained at perfect temperature throughout the entire mysterious journey, suggesting that whatever had controlled my actions understood the requirements of pharmaceutical transport better than I did. 3 weeks later, I was approached by Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a researcher studying anomalous navigation incidents among professional drivers. She'd been tracking similar cases for over a decade. Experienced drivers who lost hours or days, found themselves in impossible locations, or followed routes that existed only in their truck's electronic records. Jennifer, you're the 14th case I've documented in the past 5 years. All experienced drivers, all hauling sensitive cargo, all found in locations that don't officially exist. The pattern suggests something is specifically targeting professional truckers, using their expertise and access to transport something. Transport something? But my cargo was never compromised. Are you sure? Did you check the seals, the inventory, the temperature logs for the entire missing period? I hadn't. I'd assumed that since the pharmaceutical load arrived intact and the refrigeration unit showed consistent temperature maintenance, nothing had been disturbed. But Dr. Chen's question made me realize I'd never verified what exactly had been transported during those 8 missing hours. The cargo manifest I'd carried showed 24 cases of insulin and other diabetes medications. The delivery receipt in Memphis confirmed 24 cases received. But when I finally obtained the detailed shipping records from both ends, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The pickup manifest in Phoenix listed 24 cases. The delivery confirmation in Memphis documented 24 cases, but the detailed pharmaceutical tracking numbers didn't match. The insulin I delivered in Memphis had been manufactured 6 months after the insulin I'd picked up in Phoenix. I had somehow transported cargo that didn't exist when I'd loaded my truck. Dr. Chen nodded grimly when I showed her the discrepancy. This confirms what I've suspected. Something is using professional drivers to transport materials through space or time, using our expertise, our access, our trusted status, to move things that couldn't be moved through normal channels. I still drive the same routes, haul the same types of cargo, but now I carry recording equipment, multiple GPS units, and check my cargo seals obsessively. I've never again awakened in an unknown location or lost hours of memory. But sometimes, late at night on empty highways, I feel that familiar drowsiness that preceded my experience. My eyelids grow heavy. My hands on the steering wheel feel guided by something other than my conscious mind. And in those moments, I glimpse road signs for highways that don't exist, exits to destinations that aren't on any map. I fight to stay awake, to maintain control, because I know now that somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, between the roads we can see and the routes that exist only in electronic memory, something is still calling, to professional drivers, still using our skills and our trust to transport cargo that shouldn't exist, to destinations that can't be found, through roads that lead nowhere anyone should go. The first thing you learn about hauling hazardous materials is that time is everything, and everything runs on time. My name is Robert Kim, and I've been driving hazmat loads for 22 years. 22 years of maintaining perfect schedules, precise documentation, and absolute adherence to safety protocols, because when you're hauling chemicals that can kill people, there's no room for error. Every mile is logged, every stop is timed, every mechanical check is recorded to the minute. That's why, when I saw my odometer rolling backwards at the Petro Stopping Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, my first instinct was to check my watch. It was 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. I remember the exact time because I was running a load of industrial solvents from Houston to Nashville, and my delivery window opened at 6 a.m. the next morning. I had the math worked out perfectly, 412 miles remaining, 6 hours and 13 minutes of legal driving time, with a mandatory 10-hour break that would put me at the delivery dock with 20 minutes to spare. I'd pulled into the Petro for fuel and a mandatory rest break, running through my usual routine. Check the placards, inspect the cargo tank seals, verify the temperature monitoring system. Everything was normal until I climbed back into the cab and glanced at the instrument panel. The odometer read 438,216 miles. 15 minutes earlier, when I'd parked, it had read 438,231 miles. 15 miles less. Despite sitting stationary, with the engine running, I stared at the digital display, waiting for it to correct itself. Electronic systems glitch, sometimes a bad sensor, a software hiccup, interference from other equipment. But as I watched, the numbers continued to change. 438,215, 214, 213. My odometer was running backwards. I called my dispatcher immediately. Helen Vasquez had been handling hazmat logistics for over a decade, and she'd seen every kind of equipment failure imaginable. Helen, this is Unit 274. I've got an instrumentation problem. My odometer is decreasing while I'm parked. Decreasing? Bob, that's not how odometers work. They can fail, but they don't run in reverse. I'm watching it right now. It's gone down 18 miles in the past 20 minutes. A pause. I could hear her typing, pulling up my truck's electronic records. Bob, according to our satellite tracking, your vehicle hasn't moved since you parked 30 minutes ago. GPS shows you stationary. But there's something weird in the data stream from your truck's computer. It's reporting decreasing mileage, but that should be physically impossible. I spent the next hour on the phone with our maintenance department, running through diagnostic procedures. The truck's computer system showed no error codes. The GPS confirmed I hadn't moved. But the odometer continued its steady countdown, erasing miles I'd already driven. By 5 a.m., I'd lost 43 miles of recorded distance, and that's when the memories started. I remembered a conversation with Helen that hadn't happened yet, a discussion about a coolant leak that would develop in my truck next month. I could recall her exact words, the concern in her voice, as she described the repair requirements and downtime implications. But when I called her to ask about it, she had no idea what I was talking about. Bob, your truck passed its monthly inspection 3 days ago. No coolant issues, no scheduled maintenance. Are you feeling okay? You've been driving a lot of night shifts lately. I was feeling anything but okay. As the odometer continued its backwards journey, I found myself remembering things that belonged to the future. Conversations with mechanics about problems that hadn't occurred. Delivery schedules for loads I hadn't been assigned. Even personal memories, a birthday party for my grandson that wouldn't happen for 6 months, but which I could remember in perfect detail. The breaking point came at 7 a.m. My odometer had rolled back 91 miles, and I was sitting in the truck stop restaurant, trying to make sense of what was happening when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two drivers were discussing a chemical spill that had closed Interstate 40 near Memphis. A tanker truck carrying industrial solvents had lost a seal and leaked product across 3 lanes of highway. The cleanup would take 12 hours, backing up hazmat traffic for days. I knew that spill. I remembered it happening. The radio reports, the detour routes, the delay in my own delivery schedule. But according to the drivers discussing it, the incident had occurred 6 hours ago. Yet I clearly remembered it as something that had happened 3 weeks in the future. I walked over to their table, my hands shaking. "Excuse me, but when did you say that spill happened?" The older driver looked up at me with tired eyes. "Around 1 a.m. this morning. Just heard about it on the CB." "Why? What was the truck number? Do you know what company?" "Yeah, it was Unit 274 from Meridian Chemical. Driver named Kim, I think." "Unit 274. My truck number. My company. My name." I ran back to my truck, my heart pounding. The odometer now read 438,147 miles, exactly where it had been 3 weeks ago, the last time I'd hauled solvents through Memphis. And in my logbook, written in my own handwriting, were entries documenting the spill that had apparently happened this morning, but which I remembered as a future event. "Cargo seal failure. Detected at 100 hours. The entry read, "Notified dispatch and emergency response. Product containment initiated. Estimated cleanup time, 12 hours. Route diversion required for all hazmat traffic." I hadn't written those words. I'd been asleep in the sleeper berth at 1 a.m., but the handwriting was unmistakably mine, and the details matched exactly what the drivers in the restaurant had described. I called Helen again, my voice barely steady. "Helen, I need you to check on Unit 274's status this morning, around 1 a.m. "Bob, you are Unit 274. You've been parked in Little Rock since midnight." "No, I need you to check the other Unit 274, the one that spilled solvents on I-40. A long pause. "Bob, there is no other Unit 274. You're the only driver assigned to that truck, and there's been no spill report on I-40. But the drivers in the restaurant had heard the radio reports. They'd discussed the cleanup, the delays, the specific details of a chemical spill that existed in their past and my future simultaneously. Over the next several hours, as my odometer continued its impossible reverse journey, I experienced more fragments of temporal displacement. I remembered mechanical failures that hadn't happened yet, delivery delays that were still months away, conversations with people I hadn't met. Each memory was vivid and detailed, supported by entries in my logbook that I'd apparently written in handwriting I didn't remember forming. The most disturbing memory came when my odometer reached 437,900 miles a point I calculated I'd reached approximately 4 months ago. Suddenly, I remembered this exact moment in perfect detail, sitting in the same truck, at the same truck stop, watching my odometer roll backwards while experiencing memories of the future. I remembered the fear, the confusion, the desperate phone calls to dispatch. I remembered writing in my logbook about the experience, documenting something that defied explanation. And when I looked at my current logbook, there was the entry, written in my handwriting from 4 months ago. Time displacement event continues. Odometer reversing. Experiencing future memories. Previous incident occurred at same location. Same mileage reading. Pattern suggests cyclical occurrence. Warning. Do not trust linear time progression while parked at this location. I stared at my own handwriting, documenting an experience I was having for what felt like the first time, but which I'd apparently lived through before. The entry included specific details about future mechanical failures, schedule changes, even personal events that I now remembered as both past experiences and future predictions. My truck's maintenance records, when I finally obtained them weeks later, supported every impossible claim I'd made during the time displacement. Repairs that hadn't been needed when I'd reported them were documented months before the actual failures occurred. Parts that had been replaced based on my future memories showed wear patterns that shouldn't have developed for thousands of miles. I don't park at that truck stop anymore. I plan my routes to avoid Little Rock entirely, taking longer paths that keep me away from whatever temporal anomaly exists at that Petro stopping center. But sometimes, when I'm running behind schedule and the shortest route goes through Arkansas, I feel the pull of that place, the certainty that if I stopped there, I could remember the future again. The odometer in my current truck runs forward like it should, marking time in the proper direction. But I keep a detailed logbook now, not just for DOT compliance, but as protection against my own memories. Because I've learned that time isn't as reliable as we think, and sometimes the past reaches forward to warn us about futures we haven't lived yet. I still have that entry I wrote 4 months ago, warning myself about an experience I was having for the first time. It sits in my logbook like a message from another version of myself, one who'd lived through the same impossible hours and understood that some places exist outside the normal flow of time. The scariest part is knowing that somewhere in the future, I'll probably park at that truck stop again, and my odometer will start running backwards, and I'll remember writing these words before I've actually spoken them. The loneliness of the road gets to everyone eventually, but I never thought it would make me see myself. My name is Patricia Gonzalez, and I've been team driving for 11 years. 11 years of shared miles, split shifts, and constant conversation with whoever happened to be riding shotgun in my sleeper berth. Team driving is different from running solo. You're never truly alone, never completely responsible for staying alert, never stuck with nothing but CB chatter and your own thoughts for company. That's why when my partner Carmen quit in July to take a local job, the silence hit me harder than I'd expected. I'd been running solo for 3 months when it started happening at the Travel Centers of America in Oak Grove, Missouri. I was hauling electronics from Kansas City to Atlanta, making good time despite having to take mandatory rest breaks alone, instead of switching drivers. Solo operations meant longer trips, more stops, more time parked in truck stop lots, listening to the hum of reefer units and distant highway traffic. The fuel islands at the TA were busy that Thursday evening, typical for the I-70 corridor during peak freight season. I'd pulled up to Pump 7 around 6 p.m., running through the usual routine. Fuel card, diesel nozzle, squeegee for the windshield. Nothing unusual except the nagging feeling that I was forgetting something important, like when you leave the house and can't remember if you locked the door. I was topping off the tank when I heard a familiar voice from the other side of the pump island. The electronics load is running hot again. Temperatures creeping up to 38 degrees. I looked around, confused. The voice sounded exactly like mine. Same accent, same cadence, same slight hoarseness from years of truck stop coffee and diesel fumes. But there was no one else at the neighboring pumps, just empty fuel islands and the distant sound of trucks idling in the parking area. Then I heard my own voice respond. I noticed that too. The reefer unit's been cycling more frequently since Kansas City. Probably need to have it serviced in Atlanta. 2 voices that sounded exactly like me, having a conversation about my current load, discussing problems I'd been monitoring but hadn't mentioned to anyone. I walked around the pump island, looking for the source, but found nothing except oil stains on the concrete and the smell of diesel fuel. The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering details about my route, my delivery schedule, even personal observations about the truck's performance that I'd made to myself but never spoken aloud. 2 versions of my voice, discussing things only I could know, with an intimacy and shared understanding that felt like overhearing myself talking to myself. I finished fueling quickly and went inside to pay, shaken but trying to rationalize what I'd experienced. Maybe it was echo effects from the fuel island canopy. Maybe another driver, with a similar voice, had been discussing her own electronics load. The human mind plays tricks when you're tired and running alone. But the cashier behind the counter A middle-aged woman named Beth, according to her name tag, looked at me with obvious recognition. "You two working out that reefer problem?" she asked as I handed over my fuel receipt. "I'm sorry? You and your partner. Heard you discussing the temperature issues with your load. Sounded like you've got it figured out." My partner, Carmen, had quit 3 months ago. I'd been running solo since July, sleeping in an empty bunk, taking all the driving shifts myself. "I don't have a partner," I said carefully. "I've been driving alone." Beth frowned, glancing toward the fuel islands. "Huh. Could have sworn I saw two of you out there. Same company uniform, same truck. Figured you were team drivers, working through a mechanical issue." I walked back to my truck with my hands shaking slightly. Same company uniform, same truck. But there was only one truck at Pump 7 mine, and I was wearing the only Gonzales freight uniform in 100 miles. That night, parked in the TA lot for my mandatory rest period, I called my dispatcher to report the possible reefer unit problems I'd discussed with whoever I'd been talking to. "Patricia, your load's showing perfect temperature maintenance," Linda said after checking the real-time monitoring system. "Reefer unit's been running within normal parameters since pickup. No cycling issues, no temperature spikes." I could have sworn it was running hot. Temperature was creeping up to 38 degrees. "Nope. Your logs show consistent 34 degrees since Kansas City. Are you feeling okay? You've been running a lot of solo miles lately." I wasn't feeling okay. I'd had a detailed conversation about mechanical problems that didn't exist with someone who sounded exactly like me about a truck only I was driving. 2 weeks later, it happened again at the same location. I'd tried to avoid the Oak Grove TA, taking alternate routes that added miles and time to my trips. But a delayed pickup in Kansas City had put me behind schedule, and the TA was the only truck stop with available parking between my location and my required rest period. This time I was prepared. I set up my phone to record while I fueled, determined to capture whatever was causing the auditory hallucinations. The conversation began almost immediately after I started the fuel pump. "The new electronic logs are showing discrepancies again," I heard my voice say from somewhere near Pump 6. "I noticed that too," came my own voice in response. "The hours don't match up with our actual driving time. We're showing team miles but only logging solo driver hours." Team miles, solo driver hours. The conversation was discussing the exact logging problems I'd been having since Carmen quit, the way the truck's computer system still calculated for two drivers, even though I was running alone. Problems I'd been meaning to report to the safety department, but had kept putting off. I walked toward Pump 6 with my phone recording, following the sound of my own voice discussing details that existed only in my head. As I rounded the fuel island, I saw her. She was exactly my height, my build, wearing an identical Gonzales freight uniform. Her back was turned, but I could see the same ponytail I'd tied that morning, the same scuffed work boots I was wearing. She was fueling a truck identical to mine, same make, same model, same company colors. Even the license plate was the same. "The thing is," she was saying to someone I couldn't see, "Patricia doesn't realize how much she misses having someone to talk through these problems with. She's been carrying all this alone since Carmen left." I dropped my phone, the recording stopping as it hit the concrete. The sound made her turn around, and I found myself staring at my own face. Same brown eyes, same scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood accident, same expression of confused recognition. For a moment we just looked at each other, two identical women, wearing identical uniforms, standing beside identical trucks in the fluorescent glare of the fuel island lights. Then she smiled, the same crooked smile I saw in mirrors every morning. "You've been running yourself ragged," she said in my voice, with my accent, using words I might have said to myself if I could step outside my own exhaustion and look objectively at my situation. 3 months of solo driving. No one to share the load. No one to talk through problems with. I tried to speak but found I had no voice. She continued, her tone gentle but concerned. "The reefer unit isn't really running hot. The electronic logs aren't actually showing discrepancies. You're creating problems that need solving because you miss having someone to help you solve them. She finished fueling and began walking toward her truck. My truck. Our truck. As she moved, I noticed that her footsteps made no sound on the concrete, cast no shadow under the bright lights. "Patricia," she called back to me, "you need to get some rest. Real rest. Not just the mandatory breaks, but actual time off the road, before you start seeing things that aren't there." She climbed into the cab and drove away, leaving me standing alone at Pump 6 with no truck, no way to continue my route. When I walked back to Pump 7, my own truck was still there. Fuel cap open, nozzle hanging from the pump, exactly as I'd left it. The security footage, when the TA manager finally agreed to show it to me, confirmed what I'd experienced. Two women, identical in every detail, having detailed conversations at fuel pumps. Both versions of me moving independently, speaking separately, displaying knowledge that only I possessed about routes, schedules, and mechanical concerns. "It's the strangest thing I've ever seen," the manager said, pausing the video at a frame showing both versions of me standing side by side. Same person, same truck, same everything, but they're clearly separate individuals, having real conversations. I requested the complete footage from that night, all camera angles, every moment from my arrival to departure. What I discovered was more disturbing than the conversations themselves. The other Patricia appeared only when I was struggling with problems I couldn't solve alone. She emerged from my truck when I was frustrated, offered solutions when I was confused, provided companionship when the isolation became overwhelming. She was everything I needed in a driving partner, because she was me. I don't run solo anymore. I've partnered with a driver named Miguel, who doesn't ask too many questions about why I specifically requested the Oak Grove TA to be removed from all our approved route plans. He's good company, helps with the technical problems, shares the workload in ways that keep the loneliness at bay. But sometimes, late at night in truck stop parking lots, I catch glimpses of her in my mirrors, the other Patricia, the one who understood exactly what I needed to hear because she knew exactly what I was thinking. She waves sometimes, offers a thumbs up when we're struggling with difficult backing maneuvers or tricky route planning. I wave back because I know she's just trying to help, even if she's me, even if she shouldn't exist, even if her presence means I fractured something inside myself during those months of isolation and endless highway miles. The road changes you, and sometimes it changes you in ways that create new versions of yourself. Versions that emerge when the original can no longer handle the journey alone. I woke up in the cab of a truck I didn't recognize, in a parking lot that felt familiar in all the wrong ways. My name is Michael Torres, though for the first few minutes after opening my eyes, I wasn't entirely certain of that fact. What I was certain of was the taste of diesel exhaust in my mouth, the cramped feeling in my lower back that comes from sleeping in a truck seat, and the overwhelming sense that something fundamental about my life had changed while I slept. The dashboard clock read 7:32 a.m., but I had no memory of when I'd parked or why I was at the Iowa 80 truck stop in Walcott, Iowa. The truck itself was a mystery. A 2018 Peterbilt with a sleeper cab, painted in colors I didn't recognize, hauling a trailer I couldn't identify. According to the registration documents in the glove box, I was the owner-operator, with a perfect safety record, spanning what the paperwork claimed was 25 years of professional driving. 25 years that existed in official records, but nowhere in my memory. I found my commercial driver's license in my wallet, issued to Michael Torres at an address I'd never lived. The photo was definitely me. Same face, same graying beard, same scar above my left eye, from what I somehow knew was a childhood accident involving my brother's bicycle. But the endorsements listed on the license included hazmat certification, passenger transport, and specialized cargo handling that I had no recollection of obtaining. The truck stop around me buzzed with the familiar activity of the transportation industry. Drivers checking their loads, fuel attendants servicing vehicles, the constant flow of commercial traffic that keeps America's supply chain moving. Everything looked normal, routine, exactly as it should. But I felt like an actor who'd forgotten his lines in a play, where everyone else knew the script perfectly. I walked into the main building, hoping that movement would shake loose some fragment of memory, some connection to the life I'd apparently been living for 2.5 decades. The Iowa 80 is famous among drivers America's largest truck stop, a legendary waypoint on Interstate 80 that every professional trucker knows by reputation, if not by personal experience. At the fuel desk, a clerk named Janet greeted me with obvious familiarity. "Morning, Mike. The usual pump 6 for the Peterbilt?" I stared at her, searching for any recognition, any memory of previous interactions. She was a pleasant woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested years of dealing with cranky drivers and difficult customers. But to me, she was a complete stranger. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, "but I think there might be some confusion. I don't remember being here before." Janet frowned, studying my face. "Mike, you've been stopping here twice a month for over 10 years. Same pump, same fuel blend, always pay with the company card ending in 4789. I checked my wallet. There was indeed a fuel card ending in those digits, issued to Torres Transport, a company I had no memory of creating or operating. Over the next hour, as I tried to piece together my apparent history, more details emerged that existed in official records, but nowhere in my consciousness. My electronic logbooks showed a perfectly maintained driving schedule spanning years. My truck had service records, documenting regular maintenance at facilities I'd never seen. Most disturbing of all, my cell phone contained hundreds of contacts. Dispatchers, customers, other drivers, all of whom apparently knew me well but whom I couldn't identify. The breakthrough came when I called the first number in my recent call log, labeled Danny Palmer Freight. "Mike," answered a voice that sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me. "How'd that load of steel pipe work out? Get it delivered to the Baton Rouge job site on schedule?" Steel pipe to Baton Rouge. I had no memory of hauling such a load, no recollection of the route or the delivery. But as Danny continued talking, details began surfacing in my mind, not as memories, exactly, but as knowledge that seemed to exist independently of any personal experience. "The foreman at the job site was giving you trouble about the unloading schedule," Danny continued. "Something about crane availability and shift changes. And suddenly I knew exactly what he was talking about. I could picture the construction site, remember the foreman's complaints, recall the specific challenges of maneuvering a flatbed trailer loaded with 40-foot steel pipes through the narrow access roads of an active construction zone. But these weren't my memories. They felt borrowed, like watching someone else's home movies, but somehow knowing all the details. "Danny," I said carefully, "I need to ask you something strange. How long have I been hauling loads for Palmer Freight?" "Strange question, Mike. You've never hauled for us. We're competitors, remember? You've been owner-operator with Torres Transport since '07. We just share information sometimes, help each other out with routing and customer intel. But I distinctly remembered, if remembered was the right word, delivering that steel pipe load. I could describe the route, the customer contact, even the specific crane operator who'd handled the unloading. Knowledge that belonged to someone else's experience, someone who had worked for Palmer Freight. The pattern became clearer as I made more calls. Each conversation revealed knowledge I shouldn't possess about routes I'd never driven, customers I'd never served, companies I'd never worked for. I knew the layout of warehouses I'd never visited, could describe the personalities of dispatchers I'd never met, remembered conversations about loads I'd never hauled. The most unsettling discovery came when I called Midwest Logistics, a company that, according to my records, had been a major client for over 15 years. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said when I identified myself. "We don't have any driver named Michael Torres in our system. Are you sure you have the right company?" But I knew their system intimately. I could describe their loading dock procedures, their paperwork requirements, even the coffee preferences of their shipping supervisors. Knowledge that existed in my mind, but apparently had never translated into any business relationship. That evening, parked back at the Iowa 80 for another night, I began researching the memories that didn't belong to me. Using the detailed route knowledge I'd somehow acquired, I cross-referenced delivery locations with shipping company records, trying to trace the source of information that felt personal but wasn't mine. The pattern that emerged was horrifying. Every route I remembered driving, every customer I could describe in detail, every company whose procedures I somehow knew, all corresponded to drivers who had died at truck stops along Interstate 80 over the past 2 decades. The steel pipe delivery to Baton Rouge had been completed by Raymond Walsh in 2012. Walsh had died of a heart attack at the Iowa 80 3 days after that delivery, found in his cab during what was supposed to be a routine rest stop. The warehouse layout I knew in perfect detail in Memphis belonged to loads hauled by Sandra Chen in 2015. Chen had died in a truck stop accident, struck by another vehicle while conducting a pre-trip inspection. Each borrowed memory corresponded to a dead driver's final routes, their last loads, their final customers. Their terminal deliveries all transferred somehow to my consciousness while I slept at the place where they'd died. I spent 3 sleepless nights at the Iowa 80, afraid to rest but unable to leave. Each time I dozed, I awakened with new knowledge that didn't belong to me. Routes through states I'd never visited. Customers whose voices I recognized but had never spoken to. Mechanical knowledge about truck models I'd never operated. The worst part was the emotional content that came with the borrowed memories. I could feel Raymond Walsh's satisfaction at completing that difficult steel pipe delivery, his pride in maneuvering through the tight construction site access. I experienced Sandra Chen's frustration with the Memphis warehouse's inefficient loading procedures, her concern about making her delivery window despite the delays. These weren't just stolen facts, they were stolen experiences, complete with the emotions and personal investment that had made them meaningful to their original owners. On the 4th morning, I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Mike, the memories aren't yours, but they're safe with you. We're not really gone as long as someone remembers our routes, our customers, our last loads. Take care of our work, the drivers who came before." I never learned who left that note. The security cameras showed no one approaching my truck during the night. But I understood then that the Iowa 80 had become more than just a truck stop. It was a repository for the professional lives of drivers who died before completing their final runs. I still drive routes I've never planned, deliver to customers I've never met, maintain relationships with dispatchers I've never contacted. My logbooks show 25 years of experience that belongs to at least a dozen different drivers whose careers ended at mile marker 284 on Interstate 80. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them in my mirrors, shadowy figures in familiar company uniforms, checking loads that no longer exist, maintaining trucks that were scrapped years ago. They wave sometimes, acknowledging the driver who's carrying their memories forward, completing deliveries they'll never make. I wave back, because in a strange way, we're all still on the road together. Their knowledge, their experience, their dedication to the job, all preserved in the mind of someone who lost his own history to become a living archive of theirs. The Iowa 80 still feels like home, though I can't remember why. Every time I park there, I risk acquiring new memories that don't belong to me. But I keep returning, because someone needs to remember the routes they drove, the customers they served, the professional lives they lived before their final rest stop. Memory is all that remains of any driver's career. And at the Iowa 80, memory never dies. It just finds a new driver to carry it forward. Some places refuse to stay demolished, existing in the spaces between memory and reality, where GPS coordinates don't match the physical world. My name is Linda Chang, and I've been hauling refrigerated freight for 8 years. 8 years of maintaining precise temperature control, monitoring cargo that can spoil if the cold chain breaks for even a few minutes, running routes that depend on reliable infrastructure and predictable stopping points. Refrigerated transport doesn't allow for improvisation. You need truck stops with functioning electrical hookups, diesel pumps that work, parking areas where your reefer unit can run all night without disturbing other drivers. That's why discovering I'd been regularly visiting a truck stop that was demolished 15 years ago shook everything I thought I knew about the roads I travel. The first sign of trouble came during a routine DOT inspection in Des Moines. The officer was reviewing my electronic logs when he frowned at the GPS data displayed on his tablet. "Ms. Chang, you've got some unusual coordinate recordings here. Shows you stopped at the Sapbros Travel Center in Omaha, but these coordinates don't correspond to any existing facility." I leaned over to look at his screen. The timestamp showed I'd stopped there 3 days earlier, spending my mandatory 10-hour break at what I knew was a reliable truck stop with good electrical service for reefer units. I remembered the stop clearly, backing into space 47, plugging in the electrical cord, checking my load of frozen seafood before heading into the restaurant for dinner. "Those coordinates look right to me," I said. "I stop at that Sapbros every time I run this route. Been using the same parking space for years." The officer pulled up a mapping application and entered the coordinates. The location showed an empty field beside Interstate 80, with no commercial development for miles. "According to this, there's no truck stop at these coordinates, just farmland. You sure you have the right location?" I was certain. The Sapbros in Omaha had been my regular stop for over 5 years. I knew the layout by heart: 48 parking spaces arranged in 6 rows, electrical hookups for refrigerated units, a restaurant that served decent coffee and stayed open 24 hours. I could describe the fuel desk clerk who worked nights, the mechanic who occasionally helped drivers with minor repairs, even the specific electrical box where I always plugged in my reefer unit. The inspection passed without incident, but the coordinate discrepancy bothered me. That evening, I called Sapbros corporate headquarters to confirm the Omaha location's address. "I'm sorry," said the customer service representative, "but we don't have a travel center in Omaha. Our nearest Nebraska location is in Grand Island, about 2 hours west." "That can't be right. I've been stopping at your Omaha location for years, right off Interstate 80, exit 452. "Ma'am, we've never operated a facility at that exit. You might be thinking of a different truck stop chain." I spent the next hour calling every major truck stop company, describing the facility I knew so well. None of them had a record of operating a travel center at the coordinates in my GPS log. According to industry databases, no commercial truck stop had ever been built at that location, but I had clear, detailed memories of dozens of visits. I could recall specific conversations with staff members, problems with electrical hookups that had been repaired, even changes to the menu in the restaurant over the years I'd been stopping there. 3 weeks later, heading west on Interstate 80 with a load of frozen dairy products, I approached exit 452 in Omaha. The truck stop was exactly where it had always been: well-lit fuel islands, a large parking area with electrical hookups, the familiar Sapbros signage that I'd been seeing for years. I pulled into my usual parking space, number 47, and plugged in my reefer unit. Everything was normal, routine, exactly as I expected. But when I checked my GPS after completing the electrical connection, it showed my location as coordinates that supposedly corresponded to empty farmland. In the restaurant, I asked Nancy, the night clerk I'd known for years, about the coordinate discrepancy. "Oh, honey, that GPS stuff gets confused sometimes," she said, pouring coffee into my usual cup. "Satellites don't always read locations right, especially out here in farm country. You know this place is real. You've been stopping here since what, '09? 2018, actually. When I first started running this route, Nancy paused, the coffee pot halfway to the counter. 2018? Linda, you've been coming here since 2009. I remember when you first started, driving that old Freightliner with the loud reefer unit. You were nervous about backing into the electrical hookups. I'd never owned a Freightliner. My first truck had been a Kenworth, and I'd been driving for less than 8 years total. But Nancy described equipment I'd never operated, conversations I'd never had, visits that spanned a longer period than I'd been driving professionally. Nancy, I think you might have me confused with another driver. I've only been stopping here for about 5 years. She looked at me with obvious concern. Linda, are you feeling okay? You've been one of our regulars for over a decade. Same parking space, same electrical hookup, same order in the restaurant. I've watched you upgrade trucks 3 times. That night, I called my dispatcher to report the strange discrepancies. Karen had been assigning my loads since I'd started with the company 8 years ago. Linda, I'm looking at your service history right now. You've never run routes through Omaha. Your regular runs are Minneapolis to Kansas City, sometimes extending to Denver. But I don't show any loads that would take you through Nebraska. Karen, I stop in Omaha every month. It's my regular break point when I'm running the extended routes. I'm not showing any extended routes in your file. You've been running the same Minneapolis-Kansas City corridor since you started with us. Reliable, predictable, no special routing requirements. I checked my own logbooks, both electronic and paper. According to my records, I made regular stops at the Sap Bros in Omaha, with detailed entries about fuel purchases, electrical hookups, and rest periods. But my load assignments showed no deliveries that would require travel through Nebraska. The more I investigated, the more impossible my situation became. I had clear memories of a truck stop that didn't officially exist, serving loads that weren't in my dispatch records, using equipment I'd never owned. Yet the facility was undeniably real. I could touch the electrical hookups, eat meals in the restaurant, have conversations with staff who knew me by name. 2 months later, I decided to research the history of the location. If the truck stop existed only in my experience, maybe understanding its past would explain the present anomaly. The Omaha Public Library had archived newspapers dating back decades. What I found in the 2007 editions made my hands shake as I read. Truck stop demolished after fatal accident, read the headline. From September 15th, 2007. The article described the demolition of a Sap Brothers travel center following a series of accidents involving refrigerated trucks. The final incident had killed 3 drivers when an electrical fire spread to their cargo, causing explosions that destroyed most of the facility. The article included a photograph of the truck stop before its demolition. 48 parking spaces arranged in 6 rows. Electrical hookups for refrigerated units. A restaurant that stayed open 24 hours. The exact layout I knew from my regular visits. According to the newspaper, the facility had been demolished in October 2007, with the land sold to agricultural interests. The site had remained undeveloped farmland ever since. But I had been visiting that truck stop regularly since 2018, 11 years after its demolition. I drove back to the location that night, my reefer unit humming with a load of frozen vegetables that needed constant temperature monitoring. The truck stop was there as always, fully operational, well-maintained, busy with overnight traffic. I parked in space 47 and walked into the restaurant. Nancy was behind the counter greeting me with her usual smile. Evening, Linda. Same as always? Nancy, I need to ask you something. What year is it? She laughed. Honey, you've been driving too many miles. It's 2024, same as it was yesterday. Nancy, this truck stop was demolished in 2007. I've seen the newspaper articles, the photographs. This place doesn't exist anymore. Her smile faded. She looked around the restaurant, taking in the familiar surroundings as if seeing them for the first time. Linda, she said quietly, if this place was demolished, then where are we right now? Where have you been stopping all these years? I couldn't answer. We were standing in a facility that had been destroyed years before I'd obtained my commercial driver's license, having a conversation with a woman who might not exist, in a truck stop that appeared on no official maps, but provided very real electrical service to my very real refrigerated cargo. The thing is, Nancy continued, I remember the demolition. I remember the fires, the accidents, the decision to tear everything down. But I also remember all the drivers who kept coming back anyway. Drivers like you, who needed a place to stop, who remembered this facility as safe and reliable. She poured coffee into my cup with hands that seemed somehow less solid than before. Maybe some places don't really get demolished, Linda. Maybe they exist as long as people remember them, as long as drivers need them to exist. Memory can be stronger than bulldozers sometimes. I still stop at the Sap Bros in Omaha, though I know it was demolished before I started driving. My GPS still shows impossible coordinates. My dispatch records still show no loads requiring travel through Nebraska. But my reefer unit gets reliable electrical service, and Nancy always has fresh coffee ready. Sometimes I see other drivers in the parking lot, men and women in company uniforms from trucking companies that went out of business years ago, operating equipment that was scrapped decades past. They nod politely, check their loads, maintain their vehicles with the same professional routine I follow. We're all stopping at a place that doesn't exist, maintaining cargo that might not be real, following schedules that lead nowhere official records can verify. But the cold chain never breaks. The loads always arrive on time, and the truck stop provides exactly what we need, a place to rest between the world that was and the world that is. Memory builds its own infrastructure, and some destinations exist only for the drivers who remember the way there. The first thing you notice when all the voices disappear is how loud your own heartbeat becomes. My name is James Mitchell, and I've been hauling livestock for 19 years. 19 years of listening to cattle shift and low in the trailer behind me, of monitoring CB chatter for road conditions and weather updates, of staying connected to the constant flow of communication that keeps professional drivers safe on isolated highways. Livestock transport requires constant vigilance. Animals can panic, injure themselves, or overheat if conditions aren't carefully maintained. You depend on other drivers for information about traffic delays, weather changes, and road hazards that could affect your cargo. That's why the absolute silence that descended whenever I stopped at the Sinclair truck stop in Rawlins, Wyoming, felt like losing a vital sense. I first noticed it on a Tuesday evening in October, hauling a load of cattle from Colorado to Montana. The Sinclair in Rawlins had always been a reliable stop, good fuel, clean facilities, truck-friendly parking that accommodated my livestock trailer. I'd used the location dozens of times over the years without incident. But that night, as I backed into a parking space and switched off the engine, something was wrong with the world around me. The CB radio went dead. Not just quiet, completely silent, as if every transmitter within 100 miles had simultaneously shut down. No weather reports, no driver chatter, no emergency broadcasts. Even the background static that always fills unused frequencies was gone, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like being wrapped in cotton. I checked the radio immediately, cycling through all 40 channels. Nothing, not even the faint crackle of distant conversations that you can usually pick up anywhere in the American West. The radio's power indicator showed it was functioning normally, but the speakers produced only the kind of absolute quiet that shouldn't exist in our electronically saturated world. The cattle in my trailer were restless, shifting and making low sounds of distress. Normally, livestock settles down once the truck stops moving, but these animals seemed agitated, as if they could sense something wrong with the environment. I walked back to check on them, and their behavior was unlike anything I'd seen in nearly 2 decades of hauling livestock. They were all facing the same direction, away from the truck stop, toward the empty highway, stretching north into the darkness. I called my dispatcher on my cell phone. The call connected, but when Helen answered, her voice sounded strange, distant, and hollow, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. James, your voice is breaking up. Are you having equipment problems? Helen, can you hear me clearly now? I'm at the Sinclair in Rollins, and my CB radio has gone completely silent. No traffic on any channel. That's impossible. I'm monitoring channel 19 right now, and there's normal traffic. I can hear at least 5 different drivers in your area, but I could hear nothing. The silence pressed against my ears like physical weight, making me hyper-aware of my own breathing, my heartbeat, the creaking of leather in my boots as I shifted weight from foot to foot. Helen, I need you to try calling other drivers in this area. Ask if they can hear CB traffic. 20 minutes later, she called back with information that made no sense. James, I've talked to 3 drivers within 50 miles of your location. They all report normal radio traffic. But here's the strange thing, none of them can hear you when you try to transmit. It's like you're in some kind of dead zone. I spent the next hour testing every piece of communication equipment in my truck. CB radio, cell phone, emergency beacon, all showed normal function. But the CB remained completely silent, while other drivers reported they couldn't receive my transmissions. I was surrounded by invisible communication barriers, cut off from the network of voices that kept drivers connected across empty miles. The situation became more disturbing when I walked into the truck stop building. The clerk behind the counter, a young man named Pete who'd worked there for several years, greeted me normally. Evening, James. How's the cattle run going? Pete, are you getting any CB radio reports about problems in this area? Equipment failures, communication issues. He frowned, checking a small radio scanner behind the counter. CB traffic sounds normal to me. Why? But when he turned up the volume on his scanner, I heard only silence. Pete was nodding along to conversations I couldn't hear, responding to questions from drivers I couldn't detect. He was participating in a world of sound that had become inaudible to me. Can you tell me what you're hearing on the radio right now? Driver asking about road conditions on I-80 eastbound. Another one reporting a deer strike near Laramie. Pretty typical Tuesday night traffic. Pete paused, listening to something. Oh, and there's a driver saying his CB went dead at this location. Same thing you're describing. My blood went cold. What driver? What's his call sign? Pete listened more intently. Can't make out the call sign clearly. Signal's breaking up. But he's describing the exact same problem you're having, complete radio silence, that started when he parked here. I looked around the truck stop parking lot. Besides my own truck, there were 4 other commercial vehicles parked for the night. I walked outside and approached the nearest driver, a woman in her 40s, who was doing a pre-trip inspection on her rig. Excuse me, I called out. Are you having any problems with your CB radio? She looked up, confused. CB radio? I don't see anyone there, buddy. Who are you talking to? I was standing 3 feet away from her, clearly visible under the parking lot lights, but she was looking right through me, as if I didn't exist. I tried the next driver, an older man checking his load securement. Same result. He acted as if I wasn't there, continuing his work without acknowledging my presence or my questions. When I returned to the truck stop building, Pete was no longer behind the counter. A different clerk, an elderly woman I'd never seen before, stood in his place. Can I help you? She asked. Where's Pete? The young man who was working here a few minutes ago? She studied me with concern. Sir, I've been working alone all evening. There's no one named Pete on tonight's shift. I spent the next hour documenting everything. The radio silence, the invisible communication barriers, the people who couldn't see or hear me. The pattern was becoming clear. The silence wasn't just affecting my equipment. It was isolating me from the world itself, creating a bubble of disconnection that separated me from other people. When I called Helen again, she answered immediately, but her voice carried a note of panic. James, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Your truck's GPS went dark 45 minutes ago. We lost your location completely. Helen, I'm still at the Sinclair in Rollins. Same parking space. That's impossible. I'm showing no GPS signal. No electronic communication. Nothing. According to our tracking systems, you disappeared off the map at exactly 10:47 p.m. I checked my watch. It was 11:30. I'd lost 43 minutes somewhere in the silence. Helen, I need you to check our records. How many drivers have reported communication problems at this location? A long pause. James, I've been dispatch coordinator here for 12 years. We've had 7 drivers report complete communication failure at that exact truck stop. Radio silence. GPS blackouts. The whole thing. What happened to them? Another pause. Longer this time. James, they never checked in again. All 7 drivers who reported the communication problems at Rollins disappeared. Some of them were found later, their trucks abandoned on remote highways. No sign of the drivers. Others were never found at all. I looked at my watch again. 11:47. Exactly 1 hour after I'd supposedly disappeared from the tracking systems. Helen, run a timeline check. When did the communication problems start for those missing drivers? Hold on. I could hear her typing. The first report of radio silence came at 10:47 p.m. for all 7 cases. Same time your GPS went dark tonight. The silence was still absolute around my truck, but now it felt different, not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something that consumed voices, that fed on communication itself. I understood then that the missing drivers hadn't just disappeared. They'd been gradually erased from the world, starting with their voices, their ability to be heard, their connection to other people. The silence was hunting, and I was next. I started my truck immediately, pulling out of the parking space without going through my usual pre-trip routine. As I drove north on Interstate 80, away from the Sinclair truck stop, the CB radio crackled back to life. Anybody copy on James Mitchell, livestock hauler? Helen's voice came through the speaker. We've lost contact with Unit 479. I grabbed the mic. This is 479, I copy. I'm northbound on I-80. All systems normal. James! Helen's relief was audible. You were off the grid for 2 hours. Where were you? 2 hours. But I'd only been at the truck stop for 45 minutes. Somewhere in the silence, I'd lost time the same way I'd lost my voice, my visibility to other people. I still haul livestock through Wyoming, but I plan my routes to avoid Rollins entirely. The silence is still there, waiting at that truck stop, growing stronger each time it feeds on another driver's voice. Sometimes, late at night on empty highways, I hear fragments of missing conversations on my CB drivers, reporting communication failures, describing the same absolute quiet I experienced. They're still trying to call for help, but their voices exist now only in the spaces between frequencies, in the silence that swallows sound and eventually swallows the drivers themselves. The zone of silence is patient, and it's always listening for the next voice to consume. The signature on the delivery receipt was mine, but I had no memory of writing it. My name is Angela Foster, and I've been running flatbed loads for 9 years. 9 years of securing steel beams, construction equipment, and industrial machinery with chains and straps, hauling cargo that requires precision loading and careful attention to weight distribution. Flatbed work is demanding you're responsible for both the safe transport and proper securing of loads that can shift, fall, or cause catastrophic accidents if not handled correctly. Every delivery requires detailed documentation, signed receipts, and verification that the cargo reached its destination intact. That's why finding a completed delivery receipt for a load I'd never hauled, to a company that had been out of business for over 20 years, shattered everything I thought I knew about my own work. I discovered the discrepancy during a routine audit at my company's headquarters in Harrisburg. Our safety manager, Tom Wilson, was reviewing delivery documentation when he called me into his office with a puzzled expression. Angela, I need you to help me understand something. We've got a delivery receipt here, showing you transported a load of steel fabrication equipment to Keystone Manufacturing in Breezewood last month. But there's no corresponding pickup order, no load assignment, no dispatch record, and the company address doesn't match any business in our database. The receipt was printed on official Keystone Manufacturing letterhead, signed by someone named Harold Brennan in receiving, and countersigned with my own name and driver number. The cargo description matched the type of heavy equipment I regularly transported: structural steel components, fabrication machinery, specialty tools for construction projects. Tom, I remember that delivery. Keystone Manufacturing, right off Route 30 in Breezewood. Industrial complex with the blue and white buildings. Loading dock on the east side. Harold met me there personally because they were short-staffed. Tom frowned, pulling up business registration records on his computer. Angela, there's no Keystone Manufacturing registered in Pennsylvania. And according to these state business filings, there's never been a company by that name operating in Breezewood. But I could describe the facility in perfect detail. The security gate with the elderly guard who always waved. The narrow access road that required careful maneuvering with a loaded flatbed. The specific bay where they'd unloaded my trailer with their overhead crane. I remembered Harold's concerns about the delivery schedule. His relief when the equipment arrived undamaged. Even the coffee he'd offered while his crew secured the cargo. Let me check the pickup location, Tom said, tracing the load origin. This shows you loaded at Precision Metals in Pittsburgh, but we don't have any contracts with a company by that name either. I called Precision Metals, using the number from my delivery paperwork. The phone rang twice before connecting to a recorded message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected. No further information is available. Over the next several days, Tom and I investigated every detail of the impossible delivery. The steel components I'd supposedly transported didn't match any recent orders from our regular customers. The route I'd taken, documented in my electronic logs, passed through areas where no such manufacturing facilities existed. Most disturbing of all, the payment for the delivery had been deposited into our company account legitimate funds from a business that apparently didn't exist. Angela, Tom said during our third meeting, I need you to drive out to Breezewood and show me exactly where you made this delivery. Because according to every database I can access, both the pickup and delivery locations are completely fictional. The drive to Breezewood took 3 hours through the Pennsylvania mountains. I directed Tom along the exact route I remembered taking off. Interstate 76, north on Route 30, then right onto Industrial Park Drive toward the Keystone Manufacturing Complex. The industrial park was there, exactly as I remembered. But where the blue and white Keystone buildings should have been, we found only empty concrete foundations overgrown with weeds. A faded sign near the road read, Available Industrial Site. Contact Breezewood Development Corp. Tom called the development company from his cell phone. After several transfers, he reached someone who could provide historical information about the site. That lot's been empty for over 20 years, Tom reported after ending the call. There was a manufacturing company there in the 90s, Keystone Fabrication, not manufacturing. But they went out of business in 1994 following some kind of accident. Buildings were demolished in 95. Keystone Fabrication, not manufacturing, but close enough to match the company name on my delivery receipt. A business that had been demolished before I'd even obtained my commercial driver's license. Tom, I delivered equipment to that facility last month. I talked to Harold Brennan, used their loading dock, got paid for the delivery. This has to be some kind of record-keeping error. But Tom had found something else in the development company's records. Angela, they mentioned an accident. Several truck drivers disappeared in this area during the mid-90s, all carrying loads destined for Keystone Fabrication. The drivers and their cargo were never found. That evening, I returned to the Speedway Travel Plaza in Breezewood, where I'd stopped after making the delivery to Keystone Manufacturing. The facility manager, a woman named Carol who'd been working there for over 15 years, remembered me clearly. Oh sure, You stop here regularly after deliveries to the industrial park. Always get the same thing, coffee and a turkey sandwich. You usually seem relieved when you're done with those Keystone runs. Carol, how long have I been making deliveries to Keystone? She considered this. Must be going on 6 years now, maybe longer. You were one of the few drivers still willing to haul loads out there after all those problems in the 90s. Problems in the 90s. Missing drivers. Vanished cargo. But I'd only been driving commercially for 9 years, and I'd never heard of Keystone Manufacturing until I found that delivery receipt. What kind of problems? I asked. Carol's expression grew serious. Drivers would pick up loads in Pittsburgh, head out here for delivery, then just disappear. Trucks, cargo, drivers gone without a trace. State police investigated, but never found anything. Company went under eventually, probably from the insurance costs and bad publicity. She paused, studying my face. Angela, you've told me this story before. Every time you stop here after a Keystone delivery, you ask about the company, the missing drivers, the problems in the 90s. Then next month you're back asking the same questions like it's the first time you've heard about it. I spent the next week researching the disappeared drivers from the 1990s. The Pennsylvania State Police had investigated 6 separate incidents between 1992 and 1994. Professional drivers with clean records, hauling legitimate loads to Keystone Fabrication, vanishing somewhere between Pittsburgh and Breezewood. The cargo manifest described exactly the types of steel fabrication equipment I'd been delivering to the company that didn't exist. The most disturbing discovery came when I obtained the original cargo descriptions from the police files. The steel components, machinery specifications, and equipment serial numbers matched exactly the items listed on my recent delivery receipts. Not similar equipment, the exact same items, with identical serial numbers and specifications. I was completing deliveries of cargo that had vanished with its original drivers over 20 years ago. Tom arranged for a psychiatric evaluation, concerned that I might be experiencing some form of memory displacement or delusional episodes. But the medical examination found nothing wrong. My recall was detailed and consistent, my mental state was normal, and I could describe the Keystone deliveries with the same accuracy I displayed for all my other work. The thing is, Angela, the psychiatrist said during our final session, your memories of these deliveries are completely genuine. You're not fabricating or confabulating details, but you're describing experiences that are logically impossible. 3 months later, I found another delivery receipt in my files, this one for a load of construction equipment delivered to Mountain Ridge Construction, a company that had gone out of business in 1996. I remembered the delivery clearly. Difficult backing into their narrow loading dock, conversation with the foreman about delivery schedules, payment processed through their accounting department. But Mountain Ridge Construction had been demolished 28 years ago, and their foreman had been one of the missing drivers from the 1990s. I still find these receipts periodically, documenting deliveries I remember making to companies that haven't existed for decades. Each delivery corresponds to cargo that disappeared with its original driver, freight that was never delivered to its intended destination. I've stopped trying to explain the discrepancies to Tom or the company auditors. Instead, I've begun to understand that some deliveries exist outside normal time, that cargo lost in one decade might find its way to the proper destination in another. The missing drivers from the 1990s couldn't complete their runs, but somehow their loads continue to find their way to the companies that ordered them, even if those companies exist only in the spaces between what was and what is. When I drive through Breezewood now, I sometimes see other flatbed drivers at the empty industrial sites, unloading equipment for companies that closed decades ago. We nod to each other politely, professionals completing jobs that were started by drivers who never made it home. The cargo always finds its destination eventually, even if the destination exists only in the memory of loads that never arrived, deliveries that never got signed for, and drivers who disappeared carrying freight that still needs to be unloaded somewhere by someone, in the endless cycle of commerce that continues even after the companies and drivers have been forgotten. Sometimes, the loneliest drivers are the ones who think they have company. My name is Carlos Mendoza, and I've been running solo operations for 14 years. 14 years of empty passenger seats, one-sided CB conversations, and the constant hum of highway noise that fills the spaces where another person's voice should be. Solo driving is a different kind of trucking. You carry the entire responsibility for navigation, scheduling, and safety decisions without anyone to share the load or catch mistakes you might miss during long stretches of fatigue. That's why when I started having conversations with someone in my passenger seat, my first reaction wasn't fear. It was relief that the isolation finally had an end. It began on a Wednesday evening in November, pulling into the Casey's General Store in Williamsburg, Iowa. I was hauling consumer electronics from Chicago to Denver, running slightly behind schedule due to construction delays through Illinois. The Casey's was a regular stop for me: clean facilities, good fuel prices, and parking that could accommodate my 53-foot trailer without blocking access for other drivers. I'd been using the location for over 5 years, long enough for the evening shift employees to know my usual routine. As I backed into a parking space, I heard a voice from the passenger seat, offering guidance with the backing maneuver. Easy left, easy left. You've got about 3 feet to the cone. That's good, now straighten her out. The voice was clear, confident, with the tone of someone who'd spent decades helping drivers navigate tight parking situations. I glanced toward the passenger seat, expecting to see, and nothing. The seat was empty, as it had been for the entire 14-hour drive from Chicago. But the voice continued. Nice job, Carlos. These newer lots don't give you much room for error like the old truck stops used to. Back in '76, you could park a whole convoy at most places without bumping into anything. I sat still for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Fatigue hallucinations weren't uncommon among solo drivers, especially during long runs with minimal rest. The mind creates voices to fill the silence, conversations to break the monotony of endless highway miles. You all right there, partner? The voice asked, with genuine concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. I found myself responding before I could stop. Just tired, I guess. Been driving since 4 this morning. 4 a.m.? Hell, that's nothing. Remember that run we did from Seattle to Miami in '78? Drove 36 hours straight with nothing but coffee and determination. The voice was talking about shared experiences, trips I'd never taken years before I was born. But the conversation felt natural, comfortable, like talking to an old driving partner who knew my habits and preferences. I don't remember that run, I said carefully. Course you do. That was the trip where we picked up that load of lumber in Washington, had to chain up twice going through the Rockies. You were driving that old Kenworth, with the split-shifter transmission. I'd never owned a Kenworth. My first truck had been a Freightliner, purchased in 2009 when I started my owner-operator business. But the voice described the Kenworth in perfect detail. The way the clutch caught, the sound the engine made under load, even the specific gear pattern that older trucks used. When I went inside to pay for fuel, the cashier, a middle-aged woman named Betty, greeted me with a smile. Evening, Carlos. How's your co-driver doing tonight? I looked back toward my truck through the window. The passenger seat was clearly empty, visible through the windshield. I'm running solo, Betty. Have been for years. She frowned, following my gaze. Could have sworn I saw someone helping you back in. Looked like he was giving you hand signals from the passenger side. Hand signals. I remembered turning slightly to acknowledge the backing guidance, responding to gestures I couldn't see from someone who wasn't there. Must have been shadows from the lighting, I said. But Betty didn't look convinced. Back at the truck, the voice resumed as soon as I climbed into the cab. Betty's a good one. Reminds me of that cashier we used to know in Tucumcari. What was her name? Marie? Worked the night shift at that old Stuckey's that burned down in '81. The voice had knowledge of truck stops, routes, and people from decades past. It spoke with the authority of someone who'd been driving since the 70s, who'd witnessed the evolution of the trucking industry firsthand. Over the next several hours, driving west through Iowa, the conversation continued. My invisible passenger offered route suggestions, warned about speed traps, and shared stories about trucking in an era when logbooks were paper, CB radios were the primary communication method, and drivers knew each other by voice, rather than electronic identification. Take exit 247 coming up, the voice advised. There's construction on the main route that'll add an hour to your time. Learned that from a driver on the CB about 20 miles back. But my CB had been quiet for the past hour. No traffic reports, no construction warnings, no driver chatter about road conditions. Yet the alternate route the voice suggested proved to be exactly right. The main highway was closed for overnight construction work that would have delayed my delivery schedule significantly. How did you know about the construction? I asked. Same way. We always know, keep your ears open and trust the other drivers. Information flows through the trucking community like water. You just have to know how to listen. But I hadn't heard any information. The voice was receiving communications I couldn't detect, accessing knowledge I didn't possess. The most disturbing moment came during my mandatory rest period at a truck stop outside of Des Moines. I was in the sleeper berth, trying to get some sleep before the final push to Denver, when I heard the voice talking to someone else. Yeah, he's been pushing pretty hard. 14 hours today, probably another 10 tomorrow to make his delivery window. Good driver, though. Reminds me of myself when I was starting out. I sat up in the bunk. Who are you talking to? Just chatting with Frank. He's in that blue Peterbilt 2 spaces over. Says he's running produce from California to Chicago. I looked out the window. There was indeed a blue Peterbilt parked nearby, but I could see the driver in his cab, alone, apparently asleep. No conversation was taking place. Frank can hear you? Course he can. We've been jawing about routes and load rates for the past 20 minutes. He's the one told me about that way station closure in Nebraska. That'll save you about an hour tomorrow. But when I checked with the driver of the blue Peterbilt the next morning, he had no memory of any late-night conversation. He'd been asleep since 10 p.m. and hadn't spoken to anyone. The pattern continued for 3 more days. My invisible passenger would engage in conversations with other drivers, gather information about road conditions and route changes, and provide guidance that proved consistently accurate. But when I tried to verify these interactions, the other drivers had no recollection of speaking to anyone. The breakthrough came when I called my dispatcher to report the early delivery in Denver. Rita had been handling my loads for 8 years and knew my driving patterns intimately. Carlos, I've been getting some strange reports about you. Other drivers say you've been having conversations on the CB, giving advice about routes and sharing information about trucking from the 70s and 80s. But your CB records show minimal transmission activity. Rita, I haven't been using the CB much. Just normal check-ins and safety reports. That's what's strange. The conversations other drivers are reporting don't match your transmission logs. It's like someone else is using your voice and call sign, but talking about experiences you never had. That night, parked at a rest area in Colorado, I confronted the voice directly. Who are you? What do you want? A long silence then. Name's Eddie Ramirez. Been driving these roads since 1974. 42 years on the road before my number came up. Your number came up? Heart attack at a truck stop in Kansas. 2016. Happened right there in the cab. Middle of a run from Portland to Atlanta. Never got to finish that last delivery. The voice Eddie began telling me about his final run. The load he'd never delivered. The family he'd left behind. He described truck stops that had been demolished, routes that had been changed, drivers who'd retired or died. His knowledge was encyclopedic, spanning decades of trucking history I'd never witnessed. Why are you here, Eddie? Because driving alone ain't natural, Carlos. A man needs company on the road, someone to share the load and watch his back. You've been running solo so long, you forgot what it's like to have a partner. I realized then that Eddie wasn't just a hallucination or fatigue-induced fantasy. He was something more complex, a presence that filled the void left by years of isolation, providing the companionship and guidance I'd been missing without knowing it. But the cost of that companionship was becoming clear. Other drivers were hearing Eddie's voice through my CB transmissions, receiving advice and information that came from someone who'd been dead for years. I was becoming a conduit for a ghost who couldn't let go of the road. I still drive solo, but I'm never really alone. Eddie rides with me on every run, offering guidance, sharing stories, and talking to other drivers through transmissions I don't remember making. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him in my peripheral vision, a shadowy figure in the passenger seat, gesturing directions or pointing out hazards I might have missed. The other drivers accept it now. They know that when Carlos Mendoza calls in with route advice or warns about road conditions, they're hearing the voice of experience that spans generations of trucking. They don't question how I know about truck stops that closed before I started driving, or remember drivers who died decades ago. Eddie's knowledge keeps me safe. His experience guides my decisions, and his presence fills the silence that used to define my solo runs. The road is less lonely with a ghost for company, even if the price is carrying someone else's unfinished business through every mile of my own journey. Time is the one thing hazmat drivers can never afford to lose, which makes it all the more terrifying when you discover you've been losing the same hour over and over again. My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I've been hauling hazardous materials for 11 years. 11 years of maintaining precise schedules, following strict routing requirements, and documenting every minute of transport time, because when you're carrying chemicals that can kill people, regulatory compliance isn't optional. It's survival. Hazmat drivers live by the clock more than any other professionals on the road. Our electronic logs track not just location and speed, but also rest periods, fuel stops, and cargo temperature monitoring. Every transaction is timestamped. Every movement is recorded. That's why discovering I'd been making the identical fuel purchase at the same truck stop every hour for 18 consecutive hours shattered everything I understood about time, memory, and the reliability of digital records. It started on a Thursday in March, hauling a load of industrial solvents from Tulsa to Kansas City. The Pilot Flying J in Joplin, Missouri, was a routine fuel stop, good location, reliable pumps, and staff who understood the special requirements for hazmat refueling procedures. I'd used the facility dozens of times over the years, always following the same careful protocol. Park in the designated hazmat area, complete the pre-fueling safety check, maintain constant visual contact with the pumps during fueling, and document everything in my electronic logs. The first sign something was wrong came when I checked my fuel card statement during my mandatory rest period. According to the records, I'd purchased exactly 63 gallons of diesel at pump 12 at a cost of $207.49. The transaction timestamp showed 3:47 p.m., which matched my logbook entries perfectly. But I had identical receipts for the same purchase at the same pump for the same amount at 4:47 p.m., 5:47 p.m., and 6:47 p.m. Every hour on the hour, for what the digital records indicated had been 6 consecutive hours. I called the truck stop to report what I assumed was a billing error. The fuel desk manager, a woman named Diane who'd worked there for over a decade, pulled up the transaction records immediately. "Miss Thompson, I'm showing all 6 transactions as legitimate. Different employees processed each sale, and they all remember you specifically. Same friendly conversation about route planning. Same concern about the weather conditions affecting your delivery schedule." "Diane, that's impossible. I've only stopped there once today. I've been driving continuously since Tulsa." "Hold on. Let me check with the employees who handled your transactions." After several minutes, she returned to the phone with information that made no sense. "Rebecca, I've talked to 3 different employees from our afternoon shift. All of them remember serving you, all at different times. and they each described identical conversations with you about your hazmat delivery timeline and route planning concerns. My electronic logs supported this impossible timeline. According to the truck's computer system, I'd made fuel stops at exactly 47 minutes past each hour, purchased identical amounts of diesel, and spent exactly 12 minutes at the truck stop each time. But my GPS tracking showed continuous movement on Interstate 44, with no stops or delays that would account for hourly fuel purchases. The next day, I drove back to the Pilot Flying J in Joplin to investigate personally. I arrived at 3:30 p.m., planning to observe the fuel island operations and speak with the employees who'd allegedly served me multiple times. At exactly 3:47 p.m., I found myself walking into the building to pay for fuel I didn't remember purchasing. The cashier, a young man named Brian, greeted me with obvious familiarity. "Back again, Rebecca. How's that solvent load treating you? Still worried about the weather delays affecting your Kansas City delivery?" I had no memory of previous conversations with Brian, no recollection of discussing weather concerns or delivery schedules. But he was responding to information I'd apparently shared during interactions I couldn't remember. "Brian, when was the last time I was here?" He checked his register system. "About an hour ago. Same routine, 63 gallons at pump 12. Paid with your company fuel card." We talked about the construction delays on Highway 71 that might add time to your route, but I'd been parked in the truck stop lot for the past hour, observing the fuel islands and trying to understand the billing discrepancies. I hadn't purchased fuel, hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't even entered the building until this moment. "Can you show me the transaction record from an hour ago?" Brian pulled up the receipt. Transaction timestamp, 2:47 p.m. Same pump, same amount, same payment method. But the signature on the electronic pad was unmistakably mine, and the receipt included a customer service note. "Driver concerned about weather delays, advised alternate route through Highway 160. I had never signed that receipt, never received that routing advice, never had that conversation, but the digital evidence was indisputable. Over the next several hours, I began documenting a pattern that defied logical explanation. Every hour, at exactly 47 minutes past, I would experience a brief moment of disorientation, followed by finding myself inside the truck stop, paying for fuel I didn't remember purchasing. The employees would greet me as a returning customer, referencing conversations I couldn't recall, but which followed identical patterns each time. At 4:47 p.m., Brian mentioned construction delays on Highway 71 and recommended an alternate route. At 5:47 p.m., a different cashier named Lisa made the exact same recommendation, using nearly identical phrasing. At 6:47 p.m., another employee named Ted provided the same routing advice, with the same concern for weather-related delays. Each transaction was processed by a different staff member, but the conversations were virtually identical. Same concerns about delivery schedules, same questions about route planning, same helpful suggestions for avoiding traffic delays. Most disturbing was the realization that I was losing time during these interactions. Each fuel purchase was documented as taking 12 minutes, but from my perspective, the transactions seemed to occur instantaneously. I would be sitting in my truck observing the facility, then suddenly find myself inside completing a fuel purchase I didn't remember initiating. By the 8th hour, I was documenting every minute of my experience, taking photographs, recording conversations, trying to create evidence of the temporal anomaly I was experiencing. But each time I checked my documentation after the hourly fuel purchase, I found records of activities I didn't remember performing. Photos of me talking to employees I'd never met, audio recordings of conversations I'd never had, written notes in my own handwriting describing routing information I'd never received. The breakthrough came when I called my dispatcher during what should have been the 9th hourly cycle. "Rebecca, I've been trying to reach you for hours. Your truck's been showing stationary at that Joplin truck stop since yesterday afternoon. but you keep calling in location updates showing continuous progress toward Kansas City. Yesterday afternoon? Gary, I've only been here since 3 p.m. today. Rebecca, it's 10:47 a.m. on Friday. You've been at that location for 19 hours. Your electronic logs show you've been making fuel purchases every hour since yesterday afternoon. But your GPS hasn't moved more than 50 feet. I looked at my watch. It showed 3:47 p.m. on Thursday, the same time I'd arrived at the truck stop. But my cell phone displayed Gary's timestamp, 10:47 a.m. Friday. Somewhere in the cycle of identical fuel purchases, I'd lost an entire night. 18 hours had passed while I experienced the same single hour over and over again. Gary, check the delivery timestamp for my Kansas City load. A pause. Rebecca, that's the strange thing. Your delivery was completed on schedule yesterday evening. The receiving dock has your signature on the bill of lading, confirming arrival and unloading at 6:30 p.m. Thursday. But I was still in Joplin, my trailer still loaded with industrial solvents, experiencing the same hour that had started at 3:47 p.m. the previous day. The realization hit me with cold certainty. I was trapped in a temporal loop, repeating the same fuel stop interaction, while another version of myself had continued the route and completed the delivery. Time had split somehow, creating parallel experiences, where I existed simultaneously at the truck stop and on the road to Kansas City. I never found a way out of the loop deliberately. It simply ended at 11:47 p.m. Friday, 20 hours after it had begun. Suddenly, I was sitting in my truck with clear memories of the repeated fuel purchases, but my cargo was gone, and my logs showed a completed delivery I didn't remember making. The truck stop employees had no memory of serving me multiple times. According to their records, I'd made a single fuel purchase at 3:47 p.m. Thursday, had a brief conversation about routing, and left for Kansas City immediately afterward. But I still have the receipts, 18 identical fuel purchases, each verified by different employees, each documenting the same conversation about weather delays and alternate routes. Physical evidence of time that folded back on itself, creating a pocket where the same hour could be experienced repeatedly while life continued normally everywhere else. I avoid that truck stop now, planning routes that bypass Joplin entirely. Because I understand that some places exist outside the normal flow of time, creating loops where drivers can become trapped in cycles of repeated actions while their deliveries somehow complete themselves in parallel timelines. Time is the one thing hazmat drivers can't afford to lose. But some losses occur in places where time itself doesn't follow the rules we depend on for navigation through the world. The highway signs started lying to me, somewhere between mile marker 173 and 172, but I didn't realize it until I'd been driving backwards through my own route for over an hour. My name is Stephen Park, and I've been a company driver for Midwest Logistics for 16 years. 16 years of following the same basic routes, reading the same highway markers, navigating by the same interstate signs that have guided professional drivers for decades. When you've driven the same corridors as many times as I have, you develop an internal compass that works independently of GPS or written directions. You know which mile markers indicate rest areas, which exits lead to truck-friendly fuel stops, which stretches of highway require extra attention due to construction or weather conditions. That's why it took me so long to realize that the familiar markers and signs were guiding me in the wrong direction, leading me not forward toward my destination, but backwards, through a route I'd already completed. It started on a Monday morning in September, hauling a load of automotive parts from Detroit to Atlanta. I'd been driving the Michigan to Georgia corridor for over a decade, knew every truck stop and weigh station between the pickup and delivery points. The load was routine standard freight, no special handling requirements, no time-critical delivery schedules. I'd planned to make the run in 2 days with a mandatory rest period somewhere in Tennessee, arriving in Atlanta Tuesday evening with time to spare. The route began normally. Interstate 75 south through Toledo, past Dayton through Cincinnati and into Kentucky. I'd made this exact trip hundreds of times, could navigate it in my sleep, but somewhere around Dayton, I began noticing inconsistencies in the highway markers that didn't make sense, given my location and direction of travel. The first strange detail was a highway sign indicating Detroit 127 miles. I was driving south, away from Detroit, and had already covered over 200 miles since leaving the Motor City. There was no logical reason for a Detroit mileage marker to appear on my southbound route, especially showing a distance that suggested I was closer to my starting point than when I'd begun driving. I assumed it was a sign error, old markers that hadn't been updated, or construction-related signage that was providing incorrect information. Highway departments occasionally leave obsolete signs in place during road work, creating temporary confusion for drivers unfamiliar with the area. But the pattern continued. Mile marker 173 was followed by 174, then 175. In normal highway numbering, mile markers should decrease when traveling south on Interstate 75. But these markers were counting upward, as if I were driving north instead of south. I checked my GPS immediately. According to the satellite navigation, I was traveling south on I-75 at highway speed, making normal progress toward Atlanta. But the mile markers visible through my windshield contradicted the electronic data, showing numbers that increased in the wrong direction. Dispatch, this is Unit 479. I'm getting some confusing highway markers on I-75 south of Dayton. Mile markers are counting up instead of down. Copy 479. GPS shows you making normal southbound progress. Mile markers can be confusing during construction. Are you maintaining proper direction toward Atlanta? GPS says southbound, but the highway signs are showing Detroit mileage that's decreasing as I drive. Something's not matching up. 479. Trust your GPS over highway markers. Construction can create temporary signage that doesn't reflect actual direction or distance. I followed dispatch instructions and continued south, but the discrepancies became more pronounced. Exit signs began advertising destinations I'd already passed: Toledo, Detroit, cities that were now hours behind me. But the signs showed them as upcoming exits, with mileage indicators suggesting they were closer than my starting point. At a rest area near Cincinnati, I stopped to compare my location with written maps. According to every paper atlas I carried, I was approximately 400 miles south of Detroit, halfway through my route to Atlanta. But the highway signs around the rest area were advertising Detroit services and attractions as if the city were just ahead rather than hours behind me. The phenomenon intensified as I continued south. Highway signs began showing destinations in reverse chronological order. First Detroit, then Toledo, then smaller Ohio cities I'd passed in sequence during my morning drive. But they were displayed as upcoming locations, with exit numbers and mileage counts that suggested I was approaching them rather than leaving them further behind. By evening, driving through Tennessee, I was seeing signs for Kentucky cities I'd passed earlier in the day. Lexington, 43 miles. Read one sign, even though I'd driven through Lexington 6 hours earlier and was now well into Tennessee. Dispatch, this is 479 again. I'm still getting backward highway signs, now showing Kentucky cities as upcoming destinations, even though I'm in Tennessee. 479, your GPS tracking shows normal southbound progress. You're on schedule for Atlanta delivery tomorrow evening. Are you experiencing any mechanical problems or navigation equipment failures? No mechanical problems, but the highway signs are completely wrong. They're showing my route in reverse order, like I'm driving backwards through the trip I already completed. That night, during my mandatory rest period at a truck stop in Tennessee, I documented everything. Photographs of highway signs showing incorrect destinations, GPS screenshots confirming my actual location, written notes describing the sequence of contradictory markers. But when I reviewed the photos, They showed normal southbound highway signs with correct destinations and appropriate mile markers. The images didn't match what I'd seen with my own eyes. The next morning, continuing toward Atlanta, the backward signage became more extreme. Highway signs were now showing destinations from multiple days earlier, cities in Michigan, Ohio, locations I'd passed at the beginning of my route. But they were displayed with current exit information, as if I were approaching them for the first time. Most disturbing was the realization that my odometer was behaving strangely. Instead of accumulating miles as I drove, the numbers were decreasing. I was losing recorded distance while maintaining highway speed, as if the truck were traveling backwards through space while moving forward in time. Dispatch. Unit 479 reporting equipment malfunction. Odometer is running backwards, while vehicle maintains forward motion. 479. That's not a possible malfunction. Odometers record distance traveled regardless of direction. Are you sure you're reading the instrument correctly? I'm watching the numbers decrease while driving south at highway speed. Started this morning at 437,216 miles, now showing 437,198 miles, despite driving for 2 hours. A long pause. 479, return to base immediately for equipment inspection. Do not continue to Atlanta. We're dispatching a replacement driver for your load. But I couldn't return to base. Every highway sign was directing me away from Detroit, showing my home terminal as an increasingly distant destination, despite my apparent progress toward Michigan. The signs were leading me backwards through my own route, but in the wrong direction to reach any actual destination. By Wednesday morning, I was completely lost despite being on familiar highways. The signs showed Detroit as 3 miles ahead, but I'd been seeing that same distance marker for hours without reaching the city. My odometer now showed negative mileage, a reading that shouldn't be possible with any mechanical system. The last thing I remember clearly was pulling into the Ambest travel service in Dayton, Ohio for fuel. The same truck stop where I'd noticed the first backward highway signs 2 days earlier. I woke up in my truck at that same Ambest location, with no memory of how I'd arrived there. According to my electronic logs, I'd never left Dayton. My odometer showed the exact mileage reading from when I'd first stopped there 3 days earlier, as if the entire Atlanta run had never happened. But I had clear memories of the drive, the backward highway signs, the impossible mileage markers, the odometer that counted in reverse. And my logbook contained detailed entries documenting a route I'd apparently never taken, written in my own handwriting about experiences that existed nowhere in the truck's electronic records. Dispatch confirmed that my load had been delivered to Atlanta on schedule by a driver whose identity they couldn't verify. The delivery paperwork was signed, the freight was unloaded properly, but there was no record of who had completed the run. I still drive for Midwest Logistics, but I avoid routes through Dayton entirely, because I understand now that some stretches of highway exist outside normal navigation, where signs point backwards through routes already traveled, where odometers count in reverse, and where drivers can become lost in their own completed journeys. The road system we depend on for navigation isn't as reliable as we think. Sometimes the signs lead backwards through time rather than forward through space, creating loops where drivers retrace their steps while believing they're making progress toward destinations they've already reached. The dead learn faster than we expect, especially when they have something important to tell us. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been team driving for 8 years. 8 years of sharing the cab with my partner Luis, splitting driving duties on long-haul routes that require 2 licensed operators to maintain legal service hours. Team driving creates a unique bond. You depend on each other for safety, navigation, and the constant vigilance that keeps freight moving across the country 24 hours a day. We communicate through a mix of spoken conversation, written notes, and CB radio traffic that connects us to the broader community of professional drivers. That's why when I started receiving road condition warnings on my CB radio from my father who died in 1987, 3 years before CB radios became standard equipment in commercial trucks, I initially assumed someone was playing an elaborate and cruel joke. The first message came on a Wednesday evening in November. Heading south on Interstate 81 through Virginia, Luis was sleeping in the bunk while I handled the night shift, hauling electronics from Pennsylvania to North Carolina. The Travel Centers of America in Racine, Virginia, was our planned fuel stop, a facility we'd used dozens of times over the years for its truck-friendly layout and reliable services. As I approached the truck stop, my CB crackled with a transmission on Channel 19. "Maria, this is your papa. There's black ice forming on the off-ramp at Racine. Take it slow, mija. The truck ahead of you is going to slide." The voice was unmistakably my father's, same accent, same protective tone, same habit of calling me mija that had been his trademark throughout my childhood. But Antonio Santos had died of a heart attack when I was 15 years old, during an era when truck drivers communicated through loading dock telephones and written dispatch messages. I grabbed the CB mic immediately. "Who is this? How do you know that name?" Static. No response. But as I took the off-ramp toward the truck stop, I reduced speed significantly, remembering the ice warning. Sure enough, a flatbed truck ahead of me hit a patch of black ice exactly where the voice had predicted. The driver managed to maintain control, but only because I'd left extra following distance after hearing the warning. Luis woke up as we parked at the fuel islands. "Everything okay? Felt like you were taking the exit pretty slow. Did you hear anything on the CB? Someone using my name, warning about road conditions?" He shook his head. "Been dead quiet since we left Harrisburg." "Why?" I described the transmission while we fueled, but Luis was skeptical. "Probably another driver who knows you from previous runs. Truckers look out for each other, especially on tricky road conditions." But no other driver knew my father's voice, his specific accent, or his habit of using Spanish endearments when giving protective advice. The second transmission came 2 days later, approaching a way station in North Carolina. "Maria, there's a DOT inspector at the next way station who's having a bad day. Your logbooks are perfect, but he's looking for minor violations. Check your mud flap adjustment on the trailer. The left rear is slightly loose." I pulled over immediately and found the mud flap exactly as described, loose enough that a determined inspector could cite it as a minor violation. After adjusting it, we proceeded through the way station without incident. "The guy on the CB was right," I told Luis afterward. "The mud flap was loose." "What guy? I didn't hear anyone on the radio." This pattern continued for several weeks. My father's voice would provide warnings about road hazards, traffic delays, or inspection issues that proved consistently accurate. But Luis never heard these transmissions, despite sitting 3 feet away from the same CB radio. The situation became more complex when other drivers began referencing the warnings during CB conversations. "Thanks for the heads up about the construction delay on Route 64, said a driver I'd never met during a routine traffic check. "That voice on Channel 19 probably saved us 2 hours. "What voice?" I asked. "Older guy with a Spanish accent, warning about the lane closure. Same guy who's been giving road condition updates all week. Sounds like he really knows these routes." Other drivers confirmed receiving the same warnings I'd been hearing, always from an older male voice with a Spanish accent, always providing accurate information about hazards and delays. But none of them could explain how the voice knew their names, or why the warnings were so consistently reliable. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Miguel Rodriguez, a veteran driver I'd known for 5 years. "Miguel, have you been hearing road warnings from someone with a Spanish accent on Channel 19? His expression changed immediately. "You mean the voice that sounds like my grandfather?" "Yeah, I've been getting warnings for about a month now. Calls me mijito just like Grandpa used to. But he died in 1991. Never drove a truck in his life." "Miguel, I've been getting similar warnings from someone who sounds like my father. He died in 87. We compared experiences and found identical patterns. Both of us were receiving protective warnings from voices that sounded like deceased family members, using personal terms of endearment that only those relatives would use. But the warnings were also being heard by other drivers, who interpreted them as coming from their own deceased relatives. The most disturbing realization came when I researched the history of CB radio adoption in commercial trucking. The technology didn't become standard equipment until the early 1990s, several years after my father's death. He'd driven trucks for 23 years without ever using a CB radio, relying instead on truck stop payphones and written dispatch communications. But the voice providing road warnings was using CB protocols perfectly, understanding channel etiquette, and communicating through technology my father had never encountered while alive. During our next stop at the Travel Centers of America in Rafine, I decided to test the phenomenon directly. Papa, if this is really you, I need proof. Tell me something only you would know. The CB remained silent for several minutes. Then, Maria, you were wearing the pink dress with flowers when I taught you to check tire pressure in the truck yard behind our house. You were 7 years old, and you complained that the tire iron was too heavy for you to use. I'd never told anyone about that memory. It was one of the last times my father had tried to teach me about trucks before his heart attack. A private moment that existed only in my own recollection. How are you doing this, Papa? CB radios didn't exist when you were alive. Death teaches you things, Mija. When you love someone enough, you learn whatever you need to learn to keep them safe. The technology is different, but the love is the same. That night, I called my mother in Texas to ask about my father's death. She confirmed what I'd always known: he died suddenly in 1987, years before CB radios became common in commercial trucks. But Maria, she added, your father always said that if anything happened to him, he'd find a way to keep watching over you. He was very protective, very worried about you driving those big trucks alone. Over the following months, the CB warnings continued, always providing accurate information that kept me safe on dangerous roads. But I began to understand that I wasn't receiving messages from my father alone. I was tapping into a collective network of deceased truckers and their relatives, all learning new technologies after death, to continue protecting the drivers they'd loved while alive. Other drivers reported similar experiences: grandfathers who'd never seen interstate highways providing routing advice, fathers who died before GPS technology existed, giving accurate navigation assistance, relatives who'd never driven trucks, offering mechanical guidance that prevented breakdowns. The voices were always familiar, always protective, always using personal terms of endearment that confirmed their identities. But they were also sharing knowledge they'd never possessed while alive, learning new skills and technologies in order to continue their protective roles beyond death. I still receive warnings from my father's voice, though less frequently, as my driving experience has grown. The CB radio has become more than just a communication device. It's a bridge between the living and dead drivers who refuse to let death end their responsibility to keep their families safe on the road. Love finds a way to transcend technological limitations, and protective instincts survive beyond physical death. The highway is dangerous enough without facing it alone, and sometimes the dead learn whatever they need to learn to ensure we never truly drive alone. The voices of our lost loved ones adapt to whatever communication methods are available, because keeping us safe is more important than the boundaries between life and death. Time moves differently when you're truly tired, but I never expected it to move backwards through my life while I slept. My name is Thomas Riley, and I've been an owner-operator for 20 years. 20 years of managing my own schedules, maintaining my own equipment, and calculating rest periods down to the minute, because when you're running independent operations, every hour of downtime costs money. Federal regulations require commercial drivers to take mandatory rest periods after 14 hours of service, 10 consecutive hours off duty, before starting a new driving shift. These aren't suggestions. They're safety requirements, backed by electronic logging systems that track every minute of service time. That's why when I parked at the Love's Travel Stop in Kingman, Arizona, for what I believed was a brief rest break, and awoke to discover I'd been sleeping for 3 days while aging what appeared to be several years. Everything I understood about time, rest, and the reliability of mandatory break periods collapsed. I'd been hauling machine parts from Los Angeles to Phoenix, running slightly behind schedule due to traffic delays through the desert. By the time I reached Kingman, I'd been driving for 13 hours and 57 minutes, just 3 minutes short of my maximum legal service time. The Love's Truck Stop was a familiar location, one I'd used dozens of times over the years for fuel, food, and the 10-hour breaks required by DOT regulations. I parked in space 43 at exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, set my electronic logs to off-duty status, and prepared for a standard rest period. The routine was automatic after 2 decades of professional driving. Secure the truck, check the load, set an alarm for 10 hours, and sleep in the sleeper berth until legal driving time resumed. But when my alarm woke me, something was fundamentally wrong with the world around me. The digital clock in my cab read 12:03 a.m., just 16 minutes after I'd gone to sleep. But the sunlight streaming through my windshield was the harsh, bright illumination of midday desert sun, not the darkness that should have surrounded a midnight awakening. I checked my electronic logs immediately. According to the mandatory tracking system, I'd been off duty for exactly 16 minutes. But the sun's position and intensity suggested it was noon or later, hours beyond what my sleep period should have lasted. My cell phone showed a different reality. Friday, October 18th, 2:53 p.m., 3 days after I'd parked for my rest period. I called dispatch immediately, confused and concerned about the discrepancy between my logs and actual time passage. "Thomas, thank God," said Jennifer, my regular dispatcher. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Your GPS went dark Tuesday night, and you haven't responded to any communications. Where have you been?" "Jennifer, I just woke up from my 10-hour break. My logs show I've been off duty for 16 minutes. A long pause. "Thomas, you've been missing for 72 hours. Your delivery was due Thursday morning, and the customer has been calling every few hours asking about their machine parts." I looked at my reflection in the side mirror and saw something that made my hands shake. The face looking back at me was older, significantly older than the one I'd seen before my rest period. My hair was grayer, my face more lined, my eyes showing the kind of deep fatigue that accumulates over years rather than hours. "Jennifer, I need you to check my electronic logs remotely. Tell me what they show for the past 3 days." After several minutes of typing, she came back with information that made no logical sense. "Thomas, your logs show continuous driving for the entire 72-hour period. According to the system, you've been making steady progress toward Phoenix, maintaining legal speeds, taking appropriate breaks, and completing a normal delivery run. That's impossible. I've been asleep in Kingman since Tuesday night. Your logs show you delivered the machine parts Thursday morning and picked up a return load Thursday afternoon. You're currently showing as driving eastbound on Interstate 40, about 2 hours from your next delivery appointment. But I was parked in the same space at the Love's Truck Stop where I'd begun my rest period. My trailer still loaded with the same machine parts I'd been hauling from Los Angeles. I walked into the truck stop to confirm my location and timeline with the staff. The clerk behind the fuel desk, a middle-aged man named Gary who'd been working there for over a decade, looked at me with obvious concern. "Thomas, you've been parked in that same spot for 3 days. I've been checking on you periodically because you haven't moved or responded to our wellness checks." "Gary, I just woke up. I've been off duty for less than 20 minutes, according to my logs." He pulled up security camera footage on a computer screen behind the counter. What I saw was impossible to rationalize. 3 days of time-lapse video showing me sleeping motionlessly in my cab, never leaving the truck, never moving except for the natural shifts of someone in deep sleep. But the most disturbing aspect of the footage was watching myself age in accelerated time. Over the course of 3 days, the person in the security video visibly grew older, hair graying, face developing lines, posture changing in ways that suggested years of accumulated wear rather than days of rest. Thomas, I've never seen anything like it, Gary said quietly. You've been aging in fast forward while you slept. It's like watching someone live through years in just a few days. I called the machine parts manufacturer in Phoenix to explain the delivery delay, but they had no record of any delay. According to their shipping department, I delivered the parts on schedule Thursday morning, had been paid for the delivery, and the freight was already being used in their production line. But I'm still carrying your machine parts, I insisted. They're in my trailer right now. The shipping manager checked their warehouse records. Mr. Riley, we received your delivery 2 days ago. The parts are installed and running. There must be some confusion about what you're currently hauling. I walked back to my trailer and opened the rear doors. The machine parts were gone. Instead, I found automotive components with a delivery address in Albuquerque Freight. I had no memory of loading, destined for a customer I'd never served. My electronic logs showed that while I'd been sleeping in Kingman, another version of myself had completed the Los Angeles delivery, picked up new freight, and was currently en route to New Mexico. But the aging I'd experienced during my accelerated sleep suggested that version of myself had lived through months or years of driving in just 3 days. The phenomenon became more disturbing when I tried to resume normal operations. Despite feeling like I'd only slept for minutes, my body showed signs of extended rest, muscles stiff from prolonged inactivity, the kind of disorientation that comes from sleeping far longer than intended. But my mind felt alert, refreshed, as if I'd experienced only a brief nap. Most unsettling was the realization that my memories had gaps. I could remember parking for my rest period Tuesday night, but I also had fragmentary memories of delivering machine parts, picking up automotive freight, and driving routes I'd never actually traveled. These memories felt genuine, but existed alongside my clear recollection of sleeping continuously for what I'd experienced as 16 minutes. The medical evaluation I underwent the following week was inconclusive. Blood tests showed no evidence of drugs or medical conditions that would cause extended sleep or accelerated aging. The physician who examined me noted that I appeared to have aged several years in a matter of days, but could offer no medical explanation for the phenomenon. Mr. Riley, your physical condition is consistent with someone who's experienced significant time passage, but your conscious experience of brief sleep doesn't match the physical evidence. It's like your body and mind experience time at different rates. I returned to the Love's truck stop in Kingman 3 weeks later to investigate further. Gary was still working the fuel desk, and he remembered my experience clearly. Thomas, you're not the first driver who's had problems with time at this location. Maybe once or twice a year, we get drivers who check in for a rest period and emerge days later claiming they've only slept for minutes. Always the same thing: they age rapidly while sleeping, and their logs show they were driving while security cameras show them motionless in their cabs. Gary, why doesn't anyone talk about this? Why isn't there any official record? Who would believe it? Driver falls asleep for 10 minutes and ages 3 years? Electronic logs showing continuous driving while security footage proves the truck never moved? It sounds insane. But Gary showed me security footage from other incidents. Drivers who'd parked for mandatory rest periods and emerged days later, visibly older, with electronic logs documenting trips they'd never taken and memories of experiences that existed only in the space between sleeping and waking. I still stop at the Loves in Kingman, but I never park in the same areas where the time distortion occurs. I've learned to recognize the spaces where other drivers have experienced accelerated aging during what they believed were brief rest periods. Areas where time moves differently, where mandatory breaks become extended journeys through compressed years. The electronic logging system that tracks our service time isn't as reliable as regulations assume. Some rest periods occur outside normal temporal flow, where sleeping for minutes can age you years, while alternative versions of yourself complete deliveries in parallel timelines. Rest is supposed to restore and refresh, but at certain truck stops, sleep becomes a journey through accelerated time, where years pass in minutes and aging occurs at supernatural rates. The mandatory rest period that should have lasted 10 hours instead lasted 3 days, while somehow compressing years of aging into what felt like moments of sleep. Time moves differently when you're truly tired, and some truck stops exist as temporal anomalies, where rest periods become journeys through compressed lifetimes that age drivers decades while they believe they've only closed their eyes for minutes.